Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened the power of the Flying Raijin God and fell in love with Yoruichi Shihōin? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A Symphony of Broken Space. The silence was the most important instrument. It was a composed, deliberate silence, woven from the sound-dampening seals that tessellated across the obsidian walls and the low, resonant hum of a chakra circulation system integrated with the living roots of the first Hokage's wood style. Here, 100 meters beneath the carved face of his father on the Hokage monument, Naruto Uzumaki had crafted his sanctuary and his laboratory. It was a place where the clamor of Konoha, the shouts of academy students, the gossip of market vendors, the endless pettitio ns of council members, faded into irrelevance. Here, there was only the work. At 24, the hero of the Fourth Great Ninja War wore his age with a quiet solemnity that would have been alien to his younger self. The boisterous orange jacket had long been retired, replaced by a form-fitting black combat uniform with muted orange trim, practical and unadorned. His blonde hair was cut shorter, less wild. And the cerulean blue of his eyes, once alight with fierce, untamed determination, now held the deep, steady calm of an ocean that had weathered 1,000 storms. The faint lines at their corners were not from laughter alone. They were etched by grief, by responsibility, and by the sleepless nights spent ensuring the peace he had bled for would last longer than he would. He stood barefoot at the center of the chamber, the cool, chakra conductive stone a familiar comfort against his soles. Before him, inscribed into the floor in glowing, silvery lines of liquid chakra, was the culminate ion of 6 years of research. The Hiraishin Shiki, Jiku Kokyogaku, the Flying Raijin Formula, Space-Time Symphony. It was beautiful. Minato Namikaze's original Hiraishin formula was a masterpiece of pragmatic genius. A rapier designed for a single, perfect thrust through the fabric of reality. Tobarama Senju's was the brutal prototype, a sledgehammer that cracked open space with raw power. Naruto's was something else entirely. It was not a weapon, it was an orchestra. Concentric circles of fuinjutsu pulsed with a soft, white light, each kanji a different note in a complex chord. The outer rings were stabilizers, anchoring the jutsu to a specific temporal frequency. The middle rings were converters, designed to draw in and refine natural energy. The core, a swirling vortex of impossibly intricate script, was the conductor. The formula that would tell reality not just where to bend, but how. Final diagnostic. Kurama, Naruto murmured, his voice a low vibration in the still air. From within the seal on his soul, a deeper, ancient rumble answered. The energy regulators in the 7th and 9th arrays are fluctuating by 0.02%. Within acceptable parameters, but they are under strain. The Kyuubi no Kitsune's voice was no longer a snarl of rage, but the gravelly counsel of a partner, an entity of immense power who had found a strange sort of peace in their shared existence. You are attempting to weave a blanket with threads of lightning, Naruto. Be mindful of the static. Naruto's lips curved in a faint smile. Got it. A little static never hurt anyone. He took a slow, deep breath. And the air in the chamber shifted. The hum of the seals intensified, and the very roots embedded in the walls seemed to sigh. He closed his eyes, sinking into sage mode. The world dissolved into a vibrant sea of energy. He could feel the life force of every citizen in Konoha above, a tapestry of 1,000,000 unique chakra signatures. He could feel the deep, slumbering pulse of the earth itself. The flow of water through the subterranean aqueducts, the silent, patient growth of the forests beyond the village walls. This was the source of his true power, the understanding that chakra was not merely a tool to be wielded, but the fundamental language of existence. He began to draw it in. The natural energy was a wild, untamed thing, a stark contrast to his own refined chakra. He didn't dominate it, he invited it. He became a conduit, allowing the planet's raw power to flow through him, guided by the perfected control he had mastered on Mount Myoboku and refined in the crucible of war. The orange pigmentation of the perfect sage flickered around his eyes, and an immense, invisible pressure began to fill the room. The silvery lines of the fuinjutsu array on the floor brightened, shifting from white to a brilliant, burning gold. Here it comes, Kurama grunted, a note of primal respect in his tone. Do not rush the infusion. Naruto raised his hands, palms facing the array. From his core, he released the second element of the symphony, Kurama's chakra. It was a torrent of raw, untamed power, crimson and bubbling with an energy so potent it could level mountains. But under Naruto's guidance, it did not erupt. It flowed, a controlled river of solar fire that poured into the array's converter rings. This was the delicate dance. The serene, boundless energy of the natural world met the violent, concentrated power of a biju. Oil and water. Life and fury. The converter seals glowed, whining under the strain as they performed their impossible task, harmonizing the two energies into a single, stable, and exponentially more powerful form of chakra. A Senjutsu Biju composite. The energy needed to teleport not just a person, but potentially a small army, from one continent to another in the blink of an eye. The ultimate deterrent. The final guarantee of the peace he had promised them all. The promise he had made to Neji's grave. The chamber floor was now a miniature sun. The light was so intense it cast sharp, dancing shadows that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Naruto, at the center of it all, was a silhouette of absolute calm. His focus was total. He could feel every quantum tremor in the space around him, every subtle shift in the energy flow. He was no longer just a man in a room, he was the focal point of a contained Big Bang. Stabilization at 99%, he whispered. His own voice sounding distant. Conductor array is primed. Inserting the key, he made a single, precise hand seal, the ram seal. It was the trigger. He carefully fed a sliver of his own chakra, imprinted with the core Hiraishin formula, into the heart of the swirling vortex of energy. For a breathtaking second, it worked. He felt a connection, a resonance that stretched beyond the confines of the chamber. Beyond Konoha, beyond the land of fire. He felt the familiar anchor of the Hiraishin markers he had left across the globe, one in the Raikage's office in Kumo, one in the sand of Gaara's cage chambers, one in a small stone on the coast of the land of water. They sang back to him, distant chimes in the vastness. The symphony was playing. Space was bending to his will. The feeling was not of power, but of profound, absolute connection. He was everywhere at once. And then, a single, discordant note. It came from nowhere. A flicker. A tremor in the matrix that was not of his making. The 0.02% fluctuation in the 7th and 9th arrays, the little bit of static Kurama had warned him about, suddenly spiked. It wasn't a failure of his seals or his control. It was an echo. Something on the other side of the wall of reality, something that resonated with the frequency he was generating, had pushed back. Naruto. Shut it down. Kurama's roar was a blast of pure panic in his mind. Something is wrong. The spatial matrix is becoming brittle. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The golden light of the array was now shot through with veins of violet, a color that felt fundamentally wrong. The harmonious hum had become a high-frequency shriek that vibrated in his bones. He tried to pull back, to sever the connection and let the built-up energy dissipate harmlessly into the earth. He couldn't. The connection he had established was no longer a line he could cut, it was a hook. The echo from beyond had latched onto his jutsu, and it was pulling. The sensation was horrifying. It was like feeling the laws of physics curdle around him. The air grew thick, then thin. The solid stone beneath his feet felt like shifting liquid. It's not breaking, Naruto grunted, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to regain control. It's tearing. The light in the chamber did not explode. It imploded. The golden sun on the floor collapsed into a single, pinprick-sized point of absolute blackness. The shriek stopped. All sound, all light, all sensation vanished. For a moment, there was nothing. An absolute, perfect void. And then the void pulled. Naruto felt a sensation that had no name in any language. It was not pain, but the deconstruction of the very concept of self. His physical body felt as if it were being unraveled thread by thread, atom by atom, and siphoned through an impossibly small hole. His consciousness stretched into an infinite, agonizing line. He saw colors that weren't colors, heard sounds that had no frequency, and felt the passage of eons in the span of a heartbeat. He was everywhere and nowhere. He was a memory and a premonition. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was nothing at all. His last conscious thought was a desperate, primal instinct. He clung to the Hiraishin formula, the one constant in the chaos, the sequence of code that defined his unique existence in space-time. It was the only anchor he had left. And then, that too, was gone. Rain. That was the first thing to register. Cold, steady rain plastering strands of blonde hair to his forehead and cheeks. The second was the ground. It was hard, gritty, and uneven beneath him. Asphalt, littered with debris. It smelled of stagnant water and decay. He gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air that scraped his throat. His lungs burned, and his limbs felt like Aiden weights that weren't entirely his own. He pushed himself up with a groan, his muscles screaming in protest. His vision swam, a nauseating blur of smeary, colored lights. He was in an alley. A narrow, dark space between two towering, featureless buildings. The walls were brick, slick with rain and streaked with grime. A rusted fire escape zigzagged its way up one side. Where? He blinked, trying to force the world into focus. The lights. They were a kaleidoscope of reds, blues, and greens, glowing with a strange, artificial intensity he'd never seen before. They spelled out characters in a language he couldn't read. The symbols sharp and angular. The air was thick with 1,000 new smells, none of them familiar. There was the clean scent of the rain, but beneath it was a chemical tang of burnt fuel. The greasy aroma of strange cooking, and the overwhelming, metallic stench of a city so vast it had its own weather. Kit, are you there? Kurama's voice was a faint, threadbare whisper in the back of his mind. Drained and exhausted. My chakra. It feels thin. Frayed. I'm here, Naruto croaked, his own voice hoarse. He coughed, spitting out a mouthful of grimy water. He leaned back against the brick wall, sliding down into a sitting position as a wave of vertigo washed over him. He ran a hand through his wet hair, trying to engage his mind, to force logic onto a situation that had none. He went through his mental checklist, a process honed by a lifetime of combat and survival. 1. Assess physical condition. He flexed his fingers, rotated his ankles. No broken bones. His muscles ached with a profound cellular exhaustion, but they were functional. His black uniform was soaked through but intact. The scroll pouch on his back and the kunai holster on his thigh were still there. 2. Assess chakra levels. He closed his eyes and tried to sense his own reserves. It was like reaching into a vast, empty cavern. He was drained, more so than after the final battle with Sasuke. He could feel a tiny, flickering wellspring deep within him, and Kurama's presence was a guttering candle in a hurricane, but he was effectively running on empty. A Rasengan was out of the question. Even a simple clone would be a struggle. 3. Assess the environment. This was where the logic broke down. He extended his senses, the way he'd been taught, reaching out to feel the world around him. And what he felt sent a jolt of pure, undiluted shock through his system. There was no natural energy. It was gone. The vibrant, life-affirming pulse of the planet that was the cornerstone of his sage mode. The energy he felt as easily as his own heartbeat, was simply absent. The world around him was spiritually inert, a dead thing. It was a terrifying, profound blindness, like a painter losing the ability to see color. But there was something else. A different kind of energy. It was everywhere, a low-level hum that permeated the very air. It was faint in the inanimate objects, slightly stronger in the scattered, unseen plant life, but it coalesced into distinct, shimmering globes in the people. Souls. He could feel their souls. Not their chakra networks, but something more fundamental, more ethereal. The city was a galaxy of these faint, flickering lights, millions of them, moving, living, dying. And some of them were wrong. He felt scattered pockets of malevolent energy, twisted and hungry. Beings of pure, negative emotion that radiated despair and a predatory instinct. They felt like corrupted echoes of the souls around them. This isn't home, he breathed, the words forming a cloud of vapor in the chilly air. The rain continued its steady rhythm, drumming against a metal dumpster nearby. The realization didn't hit him with a panic, but with a cold, heavy certainty. The jutsu hadn't just failed. It had succeeded in a way he had never intended. It hadn't moved him across the planet, it had thrown him clear off the map. He was adrift in an alien sea. A sudden, sharp spike of that wrongness flared into existence nearby, so potent and so sudden it was like a physical blow. It was a vortex of spiritual pressure, a maelstrom of hunger and rage that eclipsed the background noise of the city. It was close. And it was getting closer. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The instincts of a warrior took over where his depleted energy reserves could not. He drew a tri-pronged Hiraishin kunai from his holster, the cold, familiar weight of the steel a small comfort in this utterly foreign world. His grip was steady, his stance perfectly balanced. Even exhausted, he was a predator. A sound cut through the drone of the rain. It was a screech, a sound that was half the tearing of metal and half the scream of a tortured soul. It echoed down the alley, seeming to come from all directions at once. The spiritual pressure intensified, pressing down on him, thick and suffocating. It reeked of bloodlust. He narrowed his eyes, peering into the gloom at the mouth of the alley. A figure was beginning to resolve itself from the shadows and the rain. It was huge, at least 3 meters tall, a grotesque caricature of a man. Its body was bulbous and white, covered in what looked like chipped bone armor. A gaping, circular hole was bored straight through its chest, and its face was a nightmarish white mask, frozen in a rictus of agony, with jagged black markings that looked like tear tracks. It was one of the wrong things. A being of pure despair. Naruto's mind, ever the analyst, tried to make sense of it. High spiritual density, hostile intent, unfamiliar physiology. Appears to be a predator. The creature fixed its hollow eyes on him. It let out another gurgling shriek and took a heavy, dragging step forward. The air grew colder. He braced himself. A direct confrontation was foolish. He had no idea what this thing was capable of, and he was running on fumes. Evasion was key. He needed to escape, regroup, understand. He prepared to flick his kunai, to tag a distant rooftop and. He stopped. The Hiraishin. The jutsu required him to connect to a space-time marker. But space-time itself felt wrong here. The laws felt different. Thicker. Using the technique now, in his current state, felt like trying to punch through a wall of solid granite. It might work. Or it might simply shatter his fist. It was a risk he wasn't yet willing to take. So, it would have to be the old way. Taijutsu. Misdirection. As the creature lunged, its massive, clawed hand swiping at him with surprising speed, Naruto moved. He didn't try to meet the blow. He dropped low, his body a blur of motion, pivoting on the ball of his foot. He slid under the clumsy attack, the wind from its passage rustling his hair. He came up behind it, his kunai held in a reverse grip, and drove the point into the back of the creature's thick, muscular leg. The blade, forged from chakra-conductive metal and honed to a razor's edge, should have sunk deep. Instead, it scraped against the creature's hide with a shower of sparks and a screech of protesting steel. It penetrated less than an inch before being stopped cold. The thing's skin was as hard as tempered armor. The creature roared, a sound of pain and fury, and spun around, backhanding him with immense force. There was no time to dodge. Naruto brought his arms up in a cross guard, reinforcing them the last dregs of his accessible chakra. The impact was brutal. It was like being hit by a freight train. He was lifted off his feet and slammed into the brick wall of the alley, the impact knocking the air from his lungs and sending a spiderweb of cracks through the masonry behind him. He slumped to the ground, his vision swimming with black spots. His ears were ringing. Every bone in his body felt like it had been rattled loose. Too strong, he thought, a grim understanding dawning. Physically, it's on par with a low-level Biju. And I'm nothing right now. The masked creature loomed over him, its shadow falling across his prone form. It raised its clawed hand for a final, killing blow. The rain seemed to fall in slow motion. The neon lights blurred into abstract art. So this was it. To survive a war that claimed gods among shinobi, only to die in a filthy, nameless alley in a world that wasn't his. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. And then, a new presence. It was not a flare of energy like the monster. It was the opposite. It was a sudden, sharp void in the chaotic spiritual energy of the alley. A pinprick of perfect control and absolute silence. It was a presence so subtle, so utterly self-contained, that he hadn't even noticed its arrival. From the rusted fire escape above, a small, dark shape dropped to the ground. It landed without a sound, not even a splash in the puddles that littered the alley floor. It was a cat. A sleek, black cat with intelligent, luminous golden eyes that seemed to hold an ancient, knowing light. It sat calmly on its haunches between Naruto and the monster. Utterly dwarfed by the grotesque creature, yet radiating an aura of such profound confidence that it seemed the most dangerous thing in the alley. The masked creature paused, its claw held high. It seemed confused, its primitive, predatory instinct warring with a deeper, more primal sense of fear. It let out a low, guttural growl, a clear warning. The black cat did not react. It simply tilted its head, its golden eyes fixed on the monster. Then, it looked at Naruto. Its gaze was unnervingly perceptive, as if it were looking not at his battered body, but directly into his soul. Reading the story of the powerful, caged entity within. A flicker of what might have been curiosity, or perhaps even amusement, crossed its feline features. The moment of hesitation was broken. The monster, its rage overriding its caution, let out its final shriek and brought its claw down, aiming to obliterate the tiny cat and the broken man behind it. The world seemed to slow. The cat's form blurred. There was no explosion of chakra, no grand display of power. There was only movement, a flicker of shadow, a whisper of displaced air. The black cat appeared behind the monster, now sitting just as calmly as before. The monster stood frozen for a second, its claw still inches from the ground. A thin, dark line appeared across its thick neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, its massive head slid sideways, tumbling from its shoulders with a wet, heavy thud. The colossal body stood for a heartbeat longer before it began to disintegrate, dissolving into glowing red black particles that were swept away by the wind and the rain, vanishing as if they had never been. Silence descended upon the alley once more, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain. Naruto stared, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The speed. It was instantaneous. There was no technique, no hand seal, no warning. Just movement. It was a level of pure, physical velocity that rivaled his own father's Hiraishin at its peak. The black cat turned, its golden eyes locking with his once more. It took a few delicate steps toward him, its movements fluid and graceful. It stopped a few feet away, sat down, and began to lick its paw with an air of utter nonchalance, as if decapitating a 10-foot monster was a trivial, everyday chore. Naruto pushed himself up, leaning heavily against the wall. His body ached, but the immediate threat was gone. He looked at the impossible animal before him, and for the first time since waking up in this strange, hostile world, he felt a sliver of something other than confusion and despair. He felt intrigue. "I'm guessing," he said, his voice a rough rasp, "that you're not a normal cat." The black cat paused its grooming. It looked up at him, and its mouth opened. The voice that emerged was not a meow. It was female, low, husky, and filled with a smoky, playful amusement that sent a strange shiver down his spine. "Now what?" the cat said. Its golden eyes glinting in the neon-drenched darkness, would give you that idea. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Flash and the Felid. The rain was a silver curtain, isolating the alley from the rest of the world. In the unnatural quiet left by the monster's dissolution, Naruto remained propped against the grimy brick, his gaze locked with the impossible creature before him. A talking cat. A talking cat that moved faster than the fourth Raikage and hit with the finality of a guillotine. Kurama, a being of pure, ancient chakra who had witnessed the birth of ninjutsu, was utterly silent in his mind. A testament to the sheer absurdity of the situation. "You're a sharp one," the cat's husky voice purred, the sound a strange and compelling dissonance coming from such a small form. Most men, after being slammed through a wall by a hollow, are a little less conversational. Naruto let out a humorless chuckle, which turned into a pained cough. "Most men don't have my kind of weak." He pushed himself away from the wall, testing his balance. His ribs protested with a sharp, grinding pain, but his body's accelerated healing, even with his reserves nearly gone, was already knitting the microfractures back together. "Hollow. Is that what you called it?" He kept his Hiraishin kunai in a loose, ready grip. He might be outmatched, but he would not be caught helpless again. "It is," the cat confirmed, taking another deliberate step closer. It moved with a liquid grace that was mesmerizing. A lost soul, corrupted by regret and hunger. They are drawn to spiritual energy like moths to a flame. The cat's golden eyes flickered over him, a clear and pointed insinuation. And you, my friend, are not a flame. You are a bonfire in the middle of a dry forest. Chakra. Naruto corrected automatically. Not spiritual energy. Is there a difference to a starving man if the meal is called bread or loaf? The cat countered smoothly. The effect is the same. Your presence here is a dinner bell. More will come. As if on cue, a low, guttural howl echoed from the night sky, much closer this time. Then another, and a third, harmonizing in a chorus of predatory hunger. Naruto's head snapped up. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. 3 more of those twisted, malevolent presences, circling like vultures. The cat sighed, a surprisingly human sound of exasperation. See, no peace for the wicked. Or the dimensionally displaced. It turned and began to pad out of the alley. Come along, bonfire. Unless you'd rather become an entree. There is a place we can talk where the tableware is less likely to eat you. We need cover. And verticality. Naruto hesitated for only a second. His instincts screamed that this creature was dangerous, its power immense and its motives unknown. But those same instincts told him it was not his enemy. Not yet. And it was, currently, the only being in this entire reality that had offered something other than a swift death. He followed, his movements stiff but purposeful, his senses on high alert. The cat led him through a labyrinth of side streets and back alleys, a silent black shadow navigating the urban maze with an unnerving familiarity. The rain began to lessen, leaving the asphalt shimmering under the glare of neon signs. The air was cool and clean. They stopped at the entrance to a multi-story car park, a hulking concierge. Eat behemoth that spiraled up into the darkness. In here, the cat commanded, slipping through a gap in a chain-link fence. They dislike enclosed spaces. It's not a deterrent, but it will funnel their approach. Naruto followed, his eyes scanning the vast, dimly lit space. It was a skeleton of concrete and steel, floors connected by sweeping ramps. The air smelled of damp concrete, oil, and exhaust fumes. The rhythmic drip of water from the ceiling was the only sound. It was a perfect 3-dimensional arena. You have a name? He asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous structure. Yoruichi, the cat replied, leaping effortlessly onto the hood of a dust-covered car. Naruto. I know, Yoruichi said. The 3 howling presences were descending upon the structure now, their ritual pressure washing over the car park in waves of cold malice. Your energy is screaming your name to anything with the senses to listen. Now, Naruto, show me what the man who can tear a hole in he world can do when he's running on empty. Before he could answer, they arrived. They didn't use the entrance. They smashed through the concrete ceiling of the 3rd floor, landing on the level below in a shower of dust and debris. There were 3 of them, leaner and more agile than the first. They were canine in shape, with bodies of pale, segmented bone and masks that resembled snarling wolf skulls. They moved on all 4s. Their claws scraping against the concrete as they fanned out, their movements perfectly coordinated. A pack. Naruto didn't waste a fraction of a second. He flung 3 Hiraishin kunai in 3 different directions. One embedded itself high on a support pillar near the ceiling, another clattered onto the ramp leading down, and the third spun through the air and bed into the tire of a derelict van on the far side of the chamber. He had just created a triangular grid, his only chance at survival. The alpha of the pack lunged, a blur of white bone and black energy. It was impossibly fast, far faster than the lumbering creature from the alley. Naruto's eyes, honed by countless battles, tracked its trajectory. He had less than a tenth of a second. He pushed he last accessible dregs of his chakra into his limbs. Just as the hollow's claws were about to shred his throat, he vanished with a faint thwip of displaced air. He reappeared clinging to the support pillar by the ceiling, his chakra holding him fast against gravity. The hollow, its momentum unchecked, slammed into the spot where he'd been standing, its claws gouging deep trenches in the concrete floor. The other 2 were already moving, their attacks seamlessly coordinated. One scrambled up the wall towards his new position, while the other spat a glob of viscous, black energy from its maw. The projectile screamed through the air like a cannonball. Thwip. He teleported to the kunai on the downward ramp, the energy blast shattering the pillar he'd just vacated. He immediately pushed off, his body spinning. And threw another kunai, this one aimed directly at the back of the wall crawling hollow. It was a gamble. The creature was an unknown, but its hide couldn't be invincible everywhere. As the second hollow prepared another blast, Yoruichi moved. She was not a cat anymore. She was a current of black lightning. She exploded off the car's hood, a silent, flowing shadow that defied physics. She didn't run on the ground. She seemed to skim an inch above it. In the span of a single, indrawn breath, she had crossed 50 meters and appeared behind the hollow aiming at Naruto. There was no sound of impact. Only the sickening crack of its bone mask shattering into a dozen pieces. Yoruichi's leg was extended in a perfect axe kick, her heel having obliterated the creature's face. She flowed through the motion, landing in a low crouch as the hollow dissolved into nothingness behind her. 1 down. 2 to go. The wall crawler, distracted by its Pakmade's demise, gave Naruto the opening he needed. His thrown kunai struck true, burying itself deep in the softer tissue between the segments of its bone armor. A marker. The Alpha Hollow snarled and charged Yoruichi. At the same time, the marked wall crawler abandoned Naruto and leapt from the wall, its claws extended, aiming to pounce on Yoruichi from above. A pincer attack. Naruto's mind worked with the cold, clear speed of a battlefield commander. He saw the trajectory, the timing, the inevitable conclusion. And he saw the solution. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He focused on the marker embedded in the leaping hollow's back. Yoruichi, seeing the airborne threat, braced to meet it, her body coiling like a spring. At the absolute last microsecond, just as the Alpha Hollow was about to reach Yoruichi and the other was about to descend upon her, Naruto activated the Hiraishin. Thwip. The Alpha Hollow found itself lunging at empty air. The marked, airborne hollow did not land on Yoruichi. It appeared, mid-flight, directly in the path of its pack leader. The two creatures collided with a horrendous crunch of bone and a shriek of bewildered rage. They tumbled into a tangled, flailing heap of limbs and masks. T was an opening that would last for less than a second. It was more than enough. Yoruichi was already there, a dark whisper of motion. 2 precise, powerful strikes, one for each shattered mask. The sound of their demise was an echo in the silence that followed. The car park was still once more, the only evidence of the battle being the cracked concrete and the lingering scent of ozone. Naruto landed lightly on the ground, pulling his kunai from the van's flat tire. He was breathing heavily, a sheen of cold sweat on his brow. The successive, short-range teleports, while not as draining as a long-distance jump, had taken their toll. Impressive, the husky voice said. It came not from the ground, but from right beside him. He turned. The cat was gone. In its place stood a woman. She was tall, athletic, and possessed a beauty that was both striking and dangerous. Her skin was a rich, dark brown, a stunning contrast to her long, wild mane of violet hair, which she had tied back in a loose ponytail. Her eyes were the same shade of intelligent, molten gold as the cat's. She was also, Naruto noted with a brief, clinical sense of surprise that was almost immediately suppressed by years of battlefield pragmatism. Completely naked, she stood with an unself-conscious poise, as if clothes were a mere suggestion she had decided to ignore. You bent the rules of space, she stated, a small, appreciative smirk playing on her lips. I just break the laws of motion. Together, it's almost unfair. Shapeshifting, Naruto said, forcing his eyes to meet hers and ignoring everything else. Henge no jutsu. Something like that, she said dismissively. She stretched, her lithe, powerful muscles rippling under her dark skin. The names Yoruichi Shihōin and you, Naruto Uzumaki, are official. The most interesting thing to happen to this town in 100 years. Kurama finally found his voice, a low, stunned rumble in Naruto's mind. Well, I did not see that coming. I need answers, Yoruichi, Naruto said, his tone leaving no room for games. What were those things? Where am I? And who are you, really? Yoruichi's smirk widened. All good questions. And I know a man who loves to answer questions. He's a bit eccentric. And he'll probably try to sell you something, but his information is reliable. She began to walk towards the exit, her movements a study in fluid, confident grace. Try to keep up. Bonfire. She led him to a small, unassuming, and frankly dilapidated-looking building squeezed between 2 modern apartment complexes. A faded sign above the door read, Urahara Shoten. It looked like a traditional candy and sundry shop that had seen better days. This is the place? Naruto asked, his skepticism plain. Don't judge a book by its cover, Yoruichi said, sliding the wooden door open. It's one of his favorite tricks. The inside was cluttered and smelled of dust and old sweets. A large, muscular man with an afro and an apron was sweeping the floor. Two young children, a red-haired boy and a quiet black-haired girl, were bickering in a corner. The man, Tessai, grunted a greeting. The boy, Jinta, threw a wad of paper at the girl, Ururu, who caught it without looking. The whole scene was a bizarre tableau of mundane domesticity. Kazuki, you have a visitor, Yoruichi called out into the back of the shop. A moment later, a man emerged, fanning himself lazily. He was tall and thin, with messy blonde hair mostly hidden under a green and white striped bucket hat that shadowed his eyes. He wore traditional wooden geta sandals and a green samu. He looked like a harmless, slightly goofy shopkeeper. But Naruto could feel it. Beneath the unassuming exterior, the man's spiritual energy, his ryutsu, as Yoruichi had called it, was a coiled, sleeping ocean, vast and terrifyingly deep. This man was dangerous. Ah, Yoruichi. Welcome back. The man said, his voice light and cheerful. And you've brought a friend. Business has been so slow. I trust you're not here about your tab. He's the one. Kazuki, Yoruichi said, ignoring his banter. The anomaly. The man's fan snapped shut. The goofy smile vanished, and for a fraction of a second, the eyes under the shadow of his hat were as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. Then, just as quickly, the smile returned. As that's so. Well, this won't do at all. Talking business in the storefront is so uncivilized. He gestured with his fan. Tessai, if you would be so kind. Tessai nodded, walked over to a seemingly random rug on the floor, and lifted it, revealing a hidden trapdoor. He pulled it open, showing a ladder that descended into darkness. After you, Urahara said with a sweeping, theatrical bow. The space below the shop was a stark, shocking contrast to the cluttered store above. It was enormous. A vast, subterranean cavern stretched out before them, so large that the far walls were lost in shadow. The ground was reddish earth, dotted with flattened, rocky plateaus. The ceiling was an artificial sky, glowing with a soft, even light. It was a training ground that dwarfed any that Naruto had ever seen in Konoha. Now then, Kazuki Urahara said, his tone shifting from playful to serious. Let's talk. My name is Urahara Kazuki, ex-proprietor of this humble establishment, and a simple, honest businessman. He tipped his hat. And you are a shinobi from another dimension who uses a unique form of energy you call chakra, and just punched a hole through the dimensional barrier. Did I miss anything? Naruto stared at him, his initial surprise quickly hardening into a guarded calm. This man was far more than he appeared. You've been watching. Observing is more my style, Urahara corrected gently. Your arrival was loud, spiritually speaking. Hard to miss. The question is, was it a one-time accident? Or can you do it again? Here was the crux of it. The intelligence exchange. It was an accident, Naruto stated truthfully. An experiment with a space-time jutsu went wrong. I'm trying to get home. Jutsu. Urahara mused, tapping his chin with his fan. A fascinating term. From what we can gather, your chakra is a self-generated energy, produced internally and tied to your physical stamina. Is that correct? It's more complex than that, but yes. It's a synthesis of spiritual and physical energy, Naruto explained, deciding that a degree of transparency was the best strategy. Indeed. Here, everything is composed of reishi, or spirit particles, Urahara continued, starting to pace. The air, the ground, are souls. And those with high concentrations of it can exert their will upon it. Which creates ryutsu, spiritual pressure. What you are doing is projecting a form of ryutsu so dense, so alien in its composition, that it actively rips apart the local reishi. That's what attracts the hollows. To them, you are an all-you-can-eat buffet of unimaginable delicacy. So I'm a walking target, Naruto summarized grimly. A walking, talking, dimension-hopping cataclysm, to be precise. Urahara said with a cheerful nod. To demonstrate, he held out his hand and a faint blue glow surrounded it. My ryutsu. See how it interacts with the air. A gentle pressure. He gestured to Naruto. Show me. Naruto focused, gathering a small amount of his depleted chakra into his palm. He didn't have enough for a full Rasengan, but he could manage the first step. A small, swirling sphere of brilliant blue chakra, chaotic and perfectly contained, spun to life in his hand. The effect on the cavern was immediate. The air crackled. The reddish dust on the ground stirred and seemed to pull away from him. Yoruichi let out a low whistle. Urahara's smile was gone again, replaced by an expression of intense, scientific fascination. Incredible. It's violent. It doesn't just pressure the reishi, it converts it. It burns it as fuel. No wonder they're drawn to you. You are actively destroying their world just by existing here. The weight of that statement settled on Naruto. He was not just a visitor. He was a poison. Can you help me get back? Urahara's fan came up to hide his mouth. Getting you back would require rebuilding a bridge that has already collapsed, and we have no blueprints, no materials. And no idea what's on the other side. It is a problem of unprecedented scale. He peeked over his fan. However, your little accident didn't just throw you here. It left a wound, a rift between our worlds. That rift is unstable. It is the reason those hollows are behaving more aggressively, and why their nature seems to be changing. This was the bargain. The offer disguised as a problem. You want me to help you fix what I broke, Naruto stated. I want to help you fix it, Urahara corrected. Because that rift is your only conceivable chance of ever finding your way home. We need to study it, understand it, and stabilize it. To do that, we need to handle the side effects. Namely, the hordes of newly empowered hollows that are going to start pouring into this town. He snapped his fan shut with a sharp clack. So, here is my offer. I will provide you with a place to stay, food, clothing, and all the information and resources I have at my disposal. In exchange, you will lend me your considerable strength and unique abilities in containing this crisis. We help each other. It wasn't a choice. It was the only logical path forward. Fine, Naruto said without hesitation. I'll help. On one condition. Oh, no more games, Naruto said, his blue eyes sharp and clear. You'll give me straight answers. I've had enough of politicians and spies to last a lifetime. We're partners. Or we're nothing. Urahara looked at him for a long, silent moment. The goofy shopkeeper persona was completely gone, leaving only the shrewd, calculating eyes of a scientist and a strategist. He saw the unwavering resolve in Naruto's gaze, the steel forged in a world of war. Finally, a genuine, respectful smile touched Urahara's lips. Deal. Miles away, in a small, traditional dojo, Tatsuki Arasawa sat in Seiza, her eyes closed. She was trying to meditate, to find her center after a long day of school and karate practice. But it was impossible. For the past hour, the air itself had felt wrong. Filled with a static that made her teeth ache. There was a new presence in her town, something that felt vast and powerful like a typhoon held in a teacup. Then came the second feeling. The trio of howling, hungry things that felt like nails on a chalkboard to her spiritually aware senses. A sudden rumble shook the windows of the dojo. Her eyes snapped open. She stood and went to the window, looking out over the sleeping rooftops of Karakura town. In the distance, in the direction of the abandoned commercial district, she saw it. A brief, brilliant flash of golden light, followed by a flicker of what looked like black lightning. Then, another flash of impossible blue. The feelings of the hungry things vanished, snuffed out like candles. But the new, powerful presence remained. It wasn't like the hollows she had occasionally glimpsed. It wasn't like Ichigo's Shinigami power, which felt sharp and righteous. This was something else. It felt ancient, wild, and elemental. It felt like the earth and the sun. Tatsuki's hands clenched into fists. Whatever was happening, it was happening in her town, to her friends. She was not a Shinigami. She was not a Quincy. She was just a girl who could hit hard. But she would not stand by and do nothing. She turned from the window and picked up the polished wooden bakken leaning against the wall. Its weight was solid, real, and familiar in her hands. Her expression was set in a mask of grim determination. Tomorrow, she would start looking for answers. Back in the subterranean cavern, Yoruichi tossed a bundle of dark cloth at Naruto. Here. My old infiltration corps uniform should fit. It's better than that orange and black thing, anyway. Much more practical. Naruto caught it. It was a simple black shihakusho. The standard uniform of a Shinigami. He looked down at his own soaked, dirt-stained clothes. He was a hero in his world. A legend. Here, he was nothing. A refugee. A problem to be managed. He looked up. His eyes meeting Urahara's over the distance. He saw a fellow strategist. He glanced at Yoruichi, who was watching him with her arms crossed, an intrigued glint in her golden eyes. He saw a fellow warrior. This wasn't his world. It wasn't his fight. But the people in it were in danger because of him. And for Naruto Uzumaki, that had always been reason enough. He let out a long, slow breath. The exhaustion settling deep into his bones. All right, he said, more to himself than to them. Let's get to work. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. An unwelcome sanction. The headquarters of the Onmitsukido, the stealth force, was a place defined by absences. There was an absence of color, the walls and floors composed of stark, black slate that seemed to drink the light. There was an absence of sound, as every member, from the lowest ranked officer to the commander-in-chief herself, moved with a practiced silence that bordered on the supernatural. Most of all, there was an absence of sentiment. The second division was not a family, it was a weapon, and its components were expected to be sharp, cold, and utterly devoid of the messy complications of emotion. Sui Feng, captain of the 2nd Division and commander of the Onmitsukido, embodied this philosophy. She stood, back ramrod straight, in the center of the main training hall, the Kigen. Her arms were bare, revealing the toned, corded muscle of a warrior who had honed her body into a perfect instrument of death. Her shihakusho was immaculate, her twin braids woven so tightly they seemed severe. Her dark eyes, narrowed in concentration, missed nothing. Before her, 5 members of the executive militia were engaged in a Hakuda exercise. Their movements were blurs, their strikes nearly silent whispers of displaced air. They were the elite, the fastest and deadliest assassins in the Soul Society. Sloppy, Rikichi, Sui Feng's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as shattered ice. She hadn't moved, yet every Shinigami in the room flinched. Your pivot was a full 3 degrees off-center. Against a competent foe, you would not have taken his arm. You would have lost your own. The officer in question froze mid-strike, bowing his head in shame. My apologies. Commander. Do not apologize, she snapped. Correct it. Apologies do not win wars. Her gaze swept across the room, hard and uncompromising. She pushed them relentlessly because she knew what awaited them outside these walls. She knew the price of a single mistake, a moment's hesitation. It was a lesson she had learned at the feet of a master, a lesson had been seared into her very soul by that same master's betrayal. A heavy, plodding set of footsteps, an obnoxious sound in this sanctuary of silence, announced the arrival of her lieutenant. Marekio Omaeda, a man whose physical size was matched only by his inflated sense of self-importance, waddled into the hall, munching on a rice cracker. Captain Sui Feng, he boomed, crumbs flying from his mouth. A message for you. Urgent summons from the captain commander himself. Sui Feng's eyes narrowed. A direct summons from Yamamoto was rare. It bypassed the usual channels of divisional command. It meant something was seriously wrong. She gave a curt nod. Dismissed, she said to the room at large. The assassins vanished as if they were never there, the hall falling into an unnerving silence. She turned to her lieutenant. Report. Quote. Some kind of massive spiritual anomaly has appeared in the world of the living. Karakura town, specifically, Omaeda said, swallowing his snack. The Department of Research and Development is in an uproar. They say the energy signature is unlike anything they've ever recorded. It's not Shinigami, it's not Hollow, and it's not Quincy. It's something else. And it's powerful. Off the charts. Sui Feng's heart, an organ she usually kept under strict martial control, gave a traitorous little lurch. Karakura town. The place that man, Urahara Kazuki, had fled to. The place she had gone. 100 years felt like yesterday. A century of bitterness, of a wound that refused to scar over, welled up within her. The captain commander's orders, she asked. Our voice betraying none of her internal turmoil. Central 46 has issued a sanction, Omaeda reported, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Due to the unknown nature and immense power of the anomaly. It has been classified as a potential threat to the balance of souls. The second division is to dispatch an agent immediately. Your orders, Captain, are to investigate, assess, and if the entity is deemed hostile or uncontrollable, you are to eliminate it with extreme prejudice. A cold sense of purpose settled over her. This was her duty. An unknown power threatened the order of the worlds. It was her job to face it, to measure it, and, if necessary, to end it. The fact that this mission would take her to that specific, memory-haunted town was irrelevant. Sentiment had no place in the Onmitsukido. She would carry out her orders with the swift, impersonal efficiency for which she was known. She would be the scalpel that excised the tumor before it could spread. Prepare a senkaimon, she commanded. Turning to stride out of the hall. I will depart within the hour. Omeda blinked. Just you, Captain. You're not taking a contingent. Contingents are for occupations, Sui Feng stated without looking back. Her voice echoing in the empty hall. This is an assassination. The world Naruto had landed in was, for the most part, a symphony of gray concrete, black asphalt, and the muted colors of a society that valued function over form. The Karakura Summer Festival, however, was a glorious, defiant explosion of life and color. It was chaos. A beautiful, overwhelming, human chaos. Thousands of people, dressed in colorful yukatas and jinbei, milled through the sprawling park. The air was thick with the mingled scents of grilled squid, sweet caramelized sugar from candy apple stalls, and the faint, pleasant aroma of incense drifting from a nearby shrine. The sounds were a cacophony of taiko drumming from a performance stage, the laughter of children, the chatter of vendors hawking their wares, and the cheerful, tinny music from game booths. Paper lanterns, painted with intricate designs of koi fish and dragons, hung from every tree branch and stall roof, casting a warm, den glow over the scene as dusk began to settle. To Naruto, it was a sensory overload. His shinobi training screamed at him to find the high ground, to track every person in the crowd, to identify threats and map escape routes. The instincts that had kept him alive through a war were ill-suited for a leisurely stroll through a festival. Every laughing child who ran past him was a potential distraction. Every dense knot of people was a tactical bottleneck. Relax, bonfire, Yoruichi's voice hummed in his ear. She was in her human form, having procured a simple black yukata with a golden sash that complemented her complexion perfectly. She moved through the crowd with an easy, fluid grace, a predator perfectly camouflaged as a carefree reveler. You look like you're about to be ambushed by an entire army. Try to enjoy it. This is what you fight for, isn't it? He glanced at her. She was right, of course. This vibrant, messy, beautiful piece was the dream he had chased his entire life. But seeing it, being in it, felt foreign. Old habits, he said, his eyes still scanning. Then make some new ones, she said, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled him towards a stall where a man was expertly flipping balls of batter on a hot griddle. Takoyaki. It's a local delicacy. You haven't lived until you've burned the roof of your mouth on one of these. She bought a small boat of the octopus balls. Handing it to him, he eyed them with suspicion before tentatively trying one. The outer layer was crisp, the inside was a molten, savory explosion of flavor. It was delicious. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, the first since his arrival. See, Yoruichi said, her golden eyes glinting with amusement. The first step to understanding a culture is eating its street food. Their investigation was, as Urahara had put it, a passive one. He had tasked them with simply moving through a large crowd, a place with a high concentration of souls. They were to act as divining rods, feeling for any subtle warps in space or unusual concentrations of reishi that might indicate a weak point left by the rift. So far, they had found nothing but an abundance of good cheer and tantalizing food stalls. As they walked, Yoruichi pointed things out, explaining the significance of the paper omikuji fortunes tied to tree branches, or the meaning behind the masks of demons and folk heroes sold at a stall. For Naruto, whose knowledge of culture was largely limited to the Spartan traditions of shinobi, it was all new. He found himself listening intently, his analytical mind absorbing the information while another part of him, a part he'd long kept dormant, was simply enjoying the experience. They paused by a quiet pond at the edge of the festival grounds, away from the main throng of people. The reflection of the paper lanterns shimmered on the water's surface, where colorful koi swam in lazy circles. You carry your power like a burden, Yoruichi observed quietly. Her playful tone gone for the first time. She wasn't looking at him, but at the fish in the pond. Naruto was silent for a moment, watching the reflection of his own face in the water. The man staring back looked tired. It is a burden, he finally admitted. It's a promise. To everyone who died getting me here. To not mess it up. A promise to be strong, Yoruichi mused. A promise to be the shield. A promise to always be on guard. She finally turned to look at him, her gaze perceptive. Did you ever promise to be happy? The question caught him off guard. He didn't have an answer. In all his striving, all his fighting for the dream of peace and acceptance, he had never really considered his own happiness as a primary objective. It was always a byproduct, a potential reward for when the work was done. But the work was never done. In my world, Yoruichi continued, her voice soft, the place I came from, power is tied to duty. To rank. To a cage of tradition and expectation. I chose freedom instead. But I see the same cage in your eyes. Before Naruto could respond, the atmosphere changed. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The warm, humid air of the summer evening suddenly dropped by 20 degrees. The cheerful sounds of the festival seemed to fade, replaced by ringing silence in his ears. A spiritual pressure, cold, sharp, and precise as a surgeon's needle, descended upon the park. It was the polar opposite of the chaotic hunger of a hollow, and it was vastly different from his own warm, expansive chakra. This was the energy of a trained, disciplined, and utterly lethal killer. The civilians in the park felt it only as a sudden, inexplicable chill, a moment of unease. They shivered and pulled their yukatas tighter. But to Naruto and Yoruichi, it was a declaration of war. Yoruichi's relaxed posture vanished. She became perfectly still, her body tense and ready, her golden eyes fixed on a point in the shadows under a large ginkgo tree. Naruto was already moving, his hand on the kunai at his hip, his body instinctively placing itself between the unseen threat and the crowd of oblivious civilians behind him. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a woman, small and slight, dressed in the same black shihakusho that Yoruichi had given him. Her hair was in two tight braids, and her face was a mask of cold, professional indifference. But her eyes, dark and stormy, were fixed on Yoruichi, and they burned with 1,000 conflicting emotions. It has been a long time, Yoruichi-sama, the newcomer said, her voice as clipped and cold as her ryutsu. Yoruichi's expression was complex, a mixture of resignation, regret, and a deep, weary sadness. Sui Feng, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I am here on official business. Sanctioned by Central 46, Sui Feng replied, her gaze finally flicking to Naruto, dismissing him as an irrelevant detail. I have been ordered to investigate a spiritual anomaly that threatens the balance of our worlds. An anomaly, it seems, that you are consorting with. Her attention snapped back to Naruto, her eyes now sharp with suspicion and hostility. You, she commanded, he. Our tone that of an officer addressing a criminal. State your name and origin. Explain the nature of your power. You are in violation of Soul Society law by your very existence. Naruto felt Yoruichi tense beside him. He met Sui Feng's gaze without flinching, his own calm a stark contrast to her coiled aggression. He had faced down interrogation experts, genjutsu masters, and the cold fury of gods. This small, angry woman did not intimidate him. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice even and steady. As for the rest, it's a long story, and I don't answer to you. Sui Feng's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. You will answer to me, or you will answer to the edge of my blade. Your power is a disruption. It is a threat. By the authority granted to me as captain of the 2nd Division, I order you to submit for judgment. Quote. He is under my protection, Sui Feng, Yoruichi interjected, stepping forward slightly. He is not our enemy. Your protection. Sui Feng's voice was laced with a century of bitterness. Your protection is as fickle as your loyalty. You abandoned your rank, your duty, your division, you abandoned me. You have no authority here, traitor. The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart. Yoruichi visibly flinched. Naruto saw the pain in her eyes, and a cold, protective anger rose within him. He had seen enough of this. Your argument is with her, he said, his voice dropping low, taking on an edge of command that had made Cage tremble. I am not your concern. Leave. That single word, spoken with such calm, absolute authority, seemed to break Sui Feng's control. Her professional mask cracked, revealing the furious, prideful warrior beneath. You are not my concern. She hissed, her body tensing. You are the center of it all. I will show you the folly of defying the Gote 13. She moved. It wasn't a step or a lunge. It was an erasure. One moment she was standing 20 feet away. The next, she was upon him, her form a blur of motion that even Naruto's enhanced senses had trouble tracking. Shunpo. The flash step. It was unbelievably fast. Her hand was extended, the fingers rigid and pointed in the classic assassination technique, aiming for the juncture of his neck and shoulder to disable his entire arm. For anyone else in the Soul Society, perhaps even for most captains, the fight would have been over. But Naruto didn't even move from his spot. He didn't dodge, he didn't block. As Sui Feng's killing hand was a mere inch from his neck, the air around him shimmered. Thwip. He was gone. Sui Feng's hand struck empty air, her momentum carrying her forward into an awkward stumble. Her eyes widened in shock, her mind unable to process what had just happened. He hadn't dodged. He hadn't been fast enough to evade. He had simply ceased to be there. A sudden, light pressure on her shoulder. She froze, every muscle in her body locking up. It was him. Behind her. A voice, calm and dangerously quiet, spoke directly beside her ear. Speed is not just about moving from one point to another, Naruto said. His voice was not threatening, but instructive, like a master correcting a student. It is about making the distance between those points irrelevant. Sui Feng stood rigid, a cold dread washing over her that had nothing to do with the temperature. She hadn't felt him move. She hadn't sensed a flicker of energy. There was no trace of Shunpo, no scent of displaced air. One moment he was her target, the next he was behind her, his control so absolute that he could have taken her head without her ever knowing she was in danger. It was a level of speed that didn't just surpass her own, it rendered it obsolete. It was a complete and utter violation of the known principles of movement. She slowly turned her head. He was standing there, his expression unreadable, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. In his other hand, he was casually spinning the Hiraishin kunai he hadn't even seemed to draw. The calm in his blue eyes was more terrifying than any rage she had ever faced. It was an absolute, bloodless, and humiliating defeat, executed in less than a second. The cheerful music of the festival drifted back into the sudden silence. A surreal counterpoint to the frozen tableau by the pond. Sui Feng, the proud commander of the Onmitsukido, stood trembling, not from fear, but from the shattering of her most deeply held certainties. Yoruichi watched them both, her face a mask of complex emotions. And Naruto stood, a silent enigma, a man who had just proven that in this new, strange world, he was still a force that could bend reality to his will. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Ghost in the Machine. The standoff by the koi pond did not end with violence, but with a silence that was somehow heavier. Sui Feng, trembling with a mixture of rage and profound shock, slowly pulled away from Naruto's touch as if his hand were white-hot iron. She did not launch another attack. The utter futility of it was a cold, hard fact that her tactical mind, however bruised, could not ignore. She had brought a blade to a battle of fundamental physics and had been disarmed without a single blow. What are you? She finally whispered. He questioned directed at Naruto but born of a lifetime of certainty being shattered. Yoruichi stepped forward, her expression soft with a pity that Sui Feng would have once found infuriating. He's the one I told you about, Sui Feng. He's not a threat. He's a lost traveler looking for the way home. The energy he emits is a byproduct of his existence here, not an act of aggression. The law is absolute, Sui Feng countered, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual steel, though it was brittle. His existence creates instability. That is a crime, regardless of intent. Then the law is an ass, Naruto stated calmly, retracting his hand. A law that punishes a drowning man for making waves is a law written by fools. He looked from Sui Feng's rigid posture to Yoruichi's concerned face. Your soul society can debate the legality of my breathing later. Right now, there are bigger problems. His gaze lifted, sweeping over the rooftops of Karakura town. His sage mode, though he couldn't access its full power without natural energy, still granted him a sensory perception that was leagues beyond anyone else's. Since arriving, he had felt the background radiation of those corrupted souls, the hollows. They were a constant, low-level static. But now, he could feel a pattern. Faint threads of that malevolent energy, all leading away from the festival, converging on a single point in the distance. They're being drawn somewhere, he murmured. The ones we fought in the car park, the one in the alley, they weren't just hunting. They were congregating. Yoruichi's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. A nest. Something like it, Naruto confirmed. But it feels artificial. It feels like a lure. Sui Feng, caught between her orders and the undeniable evidence of a larger threat, hesitated. Her mission was to eliminate the anomaly, Naruto. But if he was the key to understanding a greater instability, neutralizing him now would be strategically foolish. Her duty to the Seraite demanded she gather intelligence. Swallowing her pride was a bitter pill, but it was the tactically sound decision. Where? She clipped out, the single word a concession. Naruto pointed towards the oldest part of town. There. A place with a lot of residual sadness. An echo of pain. Karakura General Hospital, Yoruichi identified immediately, her golden eyes narrowing. It's been abandoned for 10 years. A place of 1,000 little tragedies. If you wanted to harvest desperate souls, that would be the place to set your trap. The three of them moved, not as friends or allies, but as professionals with a common objective. Sui Feng, with a final, resentful glare, vanished in a flicker of shunpo, her pride demanding she arrive first. Yoruichi placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Hold on tight, bonfire. She purred. Let's show the little bee how a real flash goddess travels. Her own form blurred, her speed an effortless, flowing current of power that pulled Naruto along with her as they melted into the city's shadows. Tatsuki Arasawa hated feeling helpless. Her entire life had been a fight against that feeling, a struggle waged with calloused knuckles and an indomitable will. She had pushed her body to its limits, mastering karate not just as a sport, but as a declaration. She would not be a victim. She would be a fighter. Yet, as she crept through the rusted, creaking gates of the old Karakura hospital, she felt a cold knot of that old helplessness tightening in her stomach. She had followed her instincts, the same uncanny spiritual awareness that had always let her know when one of her friends was in trouble. The oppressive energy she'd felt earlier, the feeling of wrongness that had settled over the town, was thickest here. It clung to the derelict building like a shroud. A palpable aura of decay and menace. She'd told Orihime and the others that she was going home after the festival, but she had lied. She couldn't ignore this. Not when she had seen those brief, impossible flashes of light. Not when she could feel this cancer growing in the heart of her town. Her bakken was clutched tightly in her hand. The moonlight filtering through the grimy, broken windows of the main entrance cast long, skeletal shadows across the lobby. The reception desk was overturned, and yellowed papers were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. The air was cold and stagnant, smelling of mildew, antiseptic, and something else, something coppery and foul, like old blood. A sound echoed from the floors above. A low, rhythmic skittering, like 1,000 insects crawling over a metal surface. Tatsuki swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. She was not a Shinigami. She had no powers, beyond her own 2 fists and the heavy piece of oak in her hands. But she also had something none of them did, a familiarity with this place. Her grandfather had passed away in this hospital. She remembered these halls, these rooms. She knew the layout. Taking a deep breath, she moved deeper into the oppressive darkness, a lone warrior stepping into the dragon's lair. By the time Naruto and Yoruichi arrived, Sui Feng was already perched on the hospital's roof, a small, dark gargoyle surveying her domain. She had done a preliminary sweep. The spiritual density is dangerously high, she reported as they landed silently beside her. Foregoing any greeting, I have detected at least 20 individual hollow signatures within the structure. But they are dormant. Waiting. It's a processing plant, Naruto said. His eyes closed as he extended his senses. The analogy came to him with a chilling certainty. They're being drawn in, and then something is happening to them. Their energy signatures are being rewritten. He could feel it now, a subtle, humming frequency that permeated the entire building, a technological resonance that felt utterly alien to the raw, spiritual nature of the hollows. It was like hearing a machine trying to sing. Let's not keep them waiting, Yoruichi said, her usual levity replaced by a grim readiness. They entered through a shattered fourth-floor window, the glass crunching under their feet. The inside of the hospital was even more unsettling than the outside. The decay was profound. Gurneys were overturned in the hallways, their wheels rusted in place. IV bags, filled with a cloudy, yellowed liquid, still hung from their stands. But it was the silence that was the most unnerving. It was a dead, waiting silence. The skittering sound Tatsuki had heard was gone. As if the building itself were holding its breath. They began a systematic sweep, moving with the practiced efficiency of seasoned operatives. Sui Feng took the lead, her small frame a blur of silent motion. Her senses honed for ambush. Yoruichi moved like a shadow at her flank, while Naruto brought up the rear, his broader sensory range acting as an early warning system. For all their personal animosity, they functioned as a terrifyingly effective unit. They found the first one on the 5th floor, in the old surgical ward. It was strapped to an operating table with thick, black cables that seemed to have grown out of the metal itself. The creature was a hollow, but it had been modified. Its bone-white armor was interwoven with corroded steel plates that had been bolted directly into its flesh. Wires snaked from a humming, sparking console next to the table, disappearing into the creature's skull through a crudely drilled hole in its mask. It was a grotesque fusion of spirit and machine, a perversion of both. It was alive, but its spiritual energy was being drained away, siphoned into the building's very foundations. What is this? Sui Feng breathed, her professional coldness momentarily cracking to reveal a flicker of revulsion. Who would do this? Someone who sees souls not as people, but as batteries, Naruto answered, his voice hard. The sight resonated a dark part of his own past. The experiments of Orochimaru, the monstrous modifications of the Gedo Mazo. It was the cold, unfeeling logic of science without morality. They found more. Dozens of them, in patient rooms, in supply closets. In the morgue. Each one was a different, failed experiment. One had its limbs replaced with rusted mechanical prosthetics. Another was fused to the wall, its bow. A living conduit for the energy being channeled through the hospital. It was a gallery of horrors, an assembly line of torment. The energy isn't being stored, Yoruichi realized, placing a hand on a wall where faint, glowing lines, like a circuit board, were visible beneath the peeling paint. It's being refined and broadcast. This whole building, it's a giant antenna. It's a lure, Naruto repeated, understanding dawning. It's sending out a signal that attracts low-level hollows, then captures and refines their energy to create a stronger, more complex signal, to attract something bigger. A sudden, sharp scream cut through the silence. It was female, human, and it came from the floor below. It was a scream of fear, but it was edged with the defiant ki of a fighter. Tatsuki. Yoruichi's head snapped up, a flash of genuine alarm in her eyes. Without a word, all three of them moved. They dropped through a hole in the floor, landing in the pediatric ward on the 3rd floor. The scene that greeted them was chaos. Tatsuki Arasawa stood with her back to a wall, her bakken held in a two-handed grip. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes burned with fierce defiance. She had a long, shallow cut on her arm. And her school uniform was torn. Before her, cornering her, were three creatures unlike the others. They were smaller, faster, and almost entirely mechanical. They looked like chrome-plated spiders the size of large dogs, with multiple, red glowing optic sensors and limbs that ended in surgical blades and hypodermic needles. They were not hollows. They were constructs. Machines animated by a core of stolen, corrupted soul energy. One of the machines lunged, its bladed limbs a whirlwind of silver. Tatsuki met it head-on, her bakken a blur as she deflected its strikes with a series of desperate, clanging blocks. She was skilled, incredibly so for a human, but she was outmatched. Naruto didn't hesitate. He wasn't the closest, but he was the fastest. Thwip. He AP. Paired in a flash between Tatsuki and the machines, his back to her. He didn't even have a kunai out. He simply caught the lunging machine's primary limb in his bare hand. There was a screech of protesting metal, and the construct, which had been moving with enough force to punch through steel, stopped dead. You're done, he said, his voice flat. He tightened his grip. The chrome-plated alloy of the machine's limb crumpled in his hand like tinfoil. With a single, brutal twist, he tore the limb off and drove his fist through the machine's central chassis. There was a shower of sparks, a whine of dying machinery. And it collapsed into a heap of twitching metal. Tatsuki stared, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling. The man from the festival. The one with the impossible, sun-like energy. He had just appeared. Out of thin air. Yoruichi and Sui Feng engaged the other two. It wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. Yoruichi was a fluid shadow, her kicks and chops disabling the constructs with pinpoint precision. Sui Feng was even more direct, her shunpo placing her behind the last machine, her hand striking its power core twice in such rapid succession it sounded like a single slap. Two more heaps of scrap metal hit the floor. The room fell silent. Naruto turned to face Tatsuki, his expression softening from battlefield coldness to concern. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes flicking to the cut on her arm. Tatsuki could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She was tough, she was a fighter, but she was also smart enough to know she had been seconds away from being torn to pieces. You're reckless, Sui Feng stated, her tone accusatory. A human has no place in a battle like this. You are a liability. She's brave, Naruto countered without looking at the captain, his gaze still on Tatsuki. There's a difference. He reached out, his hand glowing with a faint, warm green light, the rudimentary medical ninjutsu he had learned from Sakura. He gently placed his hand over her wound. The bleeding stopped, and a pleasant, warm tingling spread through her arm as the skin began to knit itself back together. Tatsuki stared at his hand, then up at his face. His eyes were a startling, kind blue. For the first time, she saw the man behind the terrifying power she'd felt. And in that moment, her fear was replaced by a powerful, dizzying sense of awe and something else. Something warm that fluttered in her chest. There's a laboratory, she finally managed to say, finding her voice. In the basement. Sub-level 3. That's where the signal is coming from. Their attention snapped to the new information. Yoruichi nodded. The antenna is the hospital, but the broadcast station must be shielded. The descent into the hospital's sub-levels was a journey into the heart of the machine. The corridors here were not just derelict, they were actively modified. Thick black cables snaked along the walls like metallic vines, all pulsing with a faint, malevolent red light. They led to a single, reinforced door, the kind used for radiation containment. Sui Feng placed her hand on it. It's sealed with Kido. A powerful barrier. Allow me, Naruto said. He did. Nt bother with trying to unravel the seal. He simply placed his palm flat against the door and channeled a small, controlled pulse of his chakra. Not a Rasengan. Just pure, concussive force. The Kido barrier shattered with a sound like breaking glass, and the multi-ton steel door blew off its hinges, flying down the corridor behind it. The room beyond was a stark, sterile white, a chilling contra. Saint to the decay of the rest of the hospital. It was a state-of-the-art laboratory, filled with consoles and holographic displays. In the center of the room was a large, spherical containment field, inside of which a roiling ball of pure, condensed soul energy pulsed with a sickening light. Wires ran from this sphere to a broadcast dish aimed at the ceiling. This was the source of the lure. But the room was empty. The architect of this horror was gone. A single monitor on the main console flickered to life. A text-based message began to type itself out across the screen, the letters appearing one by one in a crisp, elegant font. Greetings, intruders. I must congratulate you. I had not anticipated the intervention of a captain-class Shinigami, let alone two, and certainly not him. What a fascinating variable you are. Dimensional traveler. Please, do not feel discouraged. This facility has already served its purpose. The data collected from the refinement process and from your energy disassembly of my security drones has been invaluable. All good science requires a baseline. Consider this a preliminary experiment. A proof of concept. The true work is yet to begin. I am building a new god for a new world. And you have all just provided me with the necessary schematics for its immune system. Do try to keep up. The message ended. A self-destruct sequence began to flash on the screen. A timer counting down rapidly from 10. We need to go. Now. Yoruichi yelled. Naruto grabbed Tatsuki, wrapping an arm around her waist. Don't fight it, he said, and before she could protest, he teleported them all with a flash of yellow light, using a kunai he'd left on the roof. They reappeared on the hospital's rooftop just as a deep, rumbling explosion tore through the building's foundations. The entire structure groaned and then began to collapse in on itself, sending a plume of dust and corrupted reishi into the night sky. As they stood there, catching their breath, a new group of figures arrived on the roof via a shimmering portal. They were Shinigami, but they wore the white Haori of the 4th Division, the Medical and Supply Corps. They were led by a woman with a gentle, serene smile and a long braid that fell over her chest. She radiated an aura of calm and quiet authority. It was Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division. My, she said, her soft voice a street arc contrast to the destruction around them. It seems we've arrived just after the party has ended. Her eyes, kind and observant, took in the entire scene. The exhausted but uninjured humans, the grim-faced captain, the collapsed hospital, and finally, Naruto. Her gaze lingered on him, her smile never wavering, but her eyes held a flicker of something else, a deep, analytical curiosity that was almost unnerving. As if she were not just looking at him, but cataloging his very biology, assessing the unique quality of his alien energy. There is a great deal of spiritual corruption here, she stated calmly. My division will handle the cleansing. Captain Sui Feng, I assume you will be making a full report to the Captain Commander. Sui Feng just gave a curt, stiff nod, her mind clearly reeling from the events of the night. Unohana's gaze returned to Naruto. You are the anomaly, I presume. Your spiritual signature is quite vibrant. Her smile widened slightly. I do hope I have the chance to study it more closely in the future. For purely medicinal reasons, of course. The offer, though couched in gentle terms, sent a chill down Naruto's spine. He had met medical nin his entire life. Sakura, Tsunade, they were healers. This woman, for all her grace, felt like something else entirely. She felt like a scientist who viewed life and death as equally fascinating states of being. The ghost in the machine was gone. But Naruto had a sinking feeling he had just met another one. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A rift in the snow. The 2 days following the hospital's collapse were a period of tense, coiled quiet. Urahara's underground training chamber had been converted into a makeshift command and analysis center. Holographic screens, jury-rigged from Soul Society technology and powered by a siphon feed from the town's electrical grid, displayed streams of complex data, the decaying reishi patterns from the explosion, atmospheric spirit particle density, and a troubling map of Karakura town dotted with faint, newly appearing micro-distortions. The atmosphere was thick with an awkward truce. Sui Feng, present under the direct, non-negotiable orders of Captain Commander Yamamoto, was a pillar of resentful silence. She observed everything with the cold, detached gaze of an intelligence operative, her contributions limited to curt, precise corrections of Yoruichi's more flamboyant theories. Yoruichi, for her part, seemed to take a perverse delight in the younger woman's discomfort, alternating between ignoring her completely and addressing her with a familial affection that made Sui Feng's jaw tighten. Naruto was the calm eye of this storm. He sat in a meditative posture at the center of the chamber, his senses extended. He was not just waiting, he was listening. Listening to the unfamiliar hum of this new world, trying to learn its rhythms, its textures. But beneath it all, he was listening for echoes of his own, a faint, desperate hope that some connection, however tenuous, might still exist. He had given Urahara the handful of Hiraishin kunai he had left, and the eccentric scientist had placed each one in a separate containment field, studying the unique space-time signature imprinted on the metal. It's remarkable, Urahara mused, peering at a screen that showed a 3D model of a kunai's energy field. Your formula doesn't just mark a location. It creates a quantum entanglement. The marker doesn't exist in a location so much as it redefines that location as being quantumly adjacent to you. It's less a key and more a permanent, metaphysical address. Can you use it to send me back? Naruto asked, his eyes remaining closed. That, Urahara said, stroking his chin, would be like trying to mail a letter by screaming the address into a hurricane. The connection is there, but the medium is too chaotic. It was then that it happened. A piercing, high-frequency whine emanated from one of the containment fields in the corner of the lab. The kunai inside, a blade he had once gifted to the Sand Village as a symbol of their alliance, began to vibrate violently, glowing with a fierce, pulsing golden light. Alarms blared across the lab as Eve Rai sensor Urahara had trained on it red-lined. What's happening? Yoruichi asked, instantly on her feet. The entanglement is being actively stimulated. Urahara exclaimed, his usual languor replaced by a feverish excitement. He rushed to a console, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. Something on the other side is pouring a massive amount of focused energy into the marker. They're not screaming into the hurricane. They're firing a focused laser through it. On the main screen, a stream of garbled data appeared. It was a chaotic mess of audio static and fragmented code. It's a signal. Urahara shouted over the din. A distress call. They've weaponized your address into a trans-dimensional beacon. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He was across the room in an instant, his hands ipping the edge of the console as he stared at the screen. His world. Someone in his world was reaching out. The hope he had suppressed for days erupted in his chest, a fierce, painful thing. Can you clear it up? He demanded, his voice tight. The dimensional barrier is corrupting 99% of the data packet, but the energy signature is pure chakra, a highly advanced form of it. It's being modulated, like a radio wave. Give me a moment. Urahara's fingers became a blur. He created subroutines, filtered the static through keto-based algorithms, and rerouted the signal through a stabilizing buffer. The static on the screen resolved into a flickering, snow-filled image. It was a woman's face, pale and framed by dark hair. Her features were sharp with intelligence and strained with exhaustion. She wore the formal robes of a noble, but her expression was that of a commander in the midst of a losing battle. The image was ghosted and distorted, but to Naruto, it was as clear as day. Koyuki. He breathed. Princess Koyuki Kazuhana. The actress he had protected years ago, who had reclaimed her birthright as the ruler of the land of snow. But the woman on the screen was not the hesitant princess he remembered. Her eyes, though tired, held the unyielding steel of a seasoned leader. Her voice crackled through the speakers, distorted but intelligible, to any Konoha frequency monitoring this channel. This is Daimyo Koyuki Kazuhana of the land of snow. Our nation is under siege. Not by shinobi, by entities of crystalline ice. They do not bleed. They do not die. They shatter and reform. They are wrong. Reality itself bends around them. Our technology is failing. Our barriers are being breached. We have tracked the origin of this phenomenon to a wound in the sky. A nexus of impossible energy. Our sensors detected this frequency originating from the same point. If anyone receives this message, we require aid. The unnatural winter is consuming everything. The signal cut out, and the kunai's golden glow faded, its vibration ceasing. The lab was plunged back into silence, a silence now filled with the horrifying implications of Koyuki's message. The rift was not a one-way street. The chaos was bleeding back into his world. Naruto's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The guilt that crashed down on him was a physical weight. His experiment. His failure. It wasn't just his problem anymore, he had endangered his entire world. I have to go back, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Impossible, Sui Feng stated, her arms crossed. Urahara himself said the path is closed. Then we open it, Naruto shot back, his eyes flashing with a power that made even the stoic captain take an involuntary step back. She might not be entirely wrong, but she's not entirely right. Either. Urahara interjected, his expression one of grim fascination. A stable portal is impossible. But they just showed us the way. They sent a signal through. It was a brute force method. Pouring immense energy into your marker. It briefly widened the microscopic tear that already exists. It's too unstable for a living being to traverse, you'd be torn apart. However, He brought up a new schematic on the screen. It was a complex array of what looked like Kido cannons, all aimed at a central focusing lens. However, if we were to build a resonant-frequency generator, a device that could match the unique space-time vibration of your marker, we could theoretically latch onto that tear and inflate it. Create a temporary, highly unstable, but potentially traversable gateway. He grinned, a manic light in his eyes. The science is purely theoretical, the energy requirements are astronomical, and the chances of it collapsing and erasing you from existence are significant. Isn't it wonderful? I'll take the chance, Naruto said without a moment's hesitation. I'm going with you, Yoruichi said, stepping to his side. I've never seen another dimension. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed on the other side. Sui Feng scoffed. This is madness. A civilian and a rogue Shinigami traveling to another world based on the insane theories of an exile. You will be accompanying them, Captain Sui Feng. The new voice was ancient, powerful, and filled with an authority that commanded absolute obedience. It emanated Fr. A small communication device on Sui Feng's wrist, a direct line to the Seraite. The holographic image of Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto flickered into existence above it, his eyes closed, his wizened face grim. Sui Feng immediately dropped to one knee. Captain Commander, we have monitored your reports, Yamamoto's voice crackled. This antagonist, who uses both Kido and technology. These reality warping side effects, they represent a threat of an unknown magnitude. This is no longer a simple containment mission. It is an expedition for intelligence. You will accompany the Ryoka, Naruto Uzumaki. You will observe his world, his abilities, and the nature of this enemy. You will gather all pertinent data and report back. That is your new mission. But, sir, are you questioning my orders? Captain of the 2nd Division. No, Captain Commander, Sui Feng said, her head bowed, her voice tight with suppressed resentment. Mission accepted. The construction of Ara's trans-dimensional resonance stabilizer took 17 frantic hours. It was a monstrous contraption of spinning gyroscopes, glowing Kido circuits, and humming power conduits that drew energy from Urahara's own Bankai. Whispered into a containment unit. Finally, it was ready. The trio stood before the focusing lens in the center of the cavern. I can only guarantee the gateway will be stable for 60 seconds, tops. Urahara yelled over the machine's deafening roar. Once you're through, the connection is severed. There's no coming back until we figure out how to re-establish the link from this side. Are you ready? Naruto gave a sharp nod. He looked at Yoruichi, who gave him a confident wink. He glanced at Sui Feng, who merely stared ahead, her face an impassive mask. He took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Urahara threw a final lever. Energy surged into the lens, coalescing into a point of blinding light. The air did not open. It tore. A shrieking, violent vortex of swirling colors and fractured images erupted before them. It did not look like a doorway. It looked like a wound. Go now. Naruto leapt through without a second thought. Yoruichi followed a heartbeat behind him, and Sui Feng, ever the dutiful soldier, plunged in after her. The transit was a nauseating, violent experience. It was a feeling of being crushed and stretched at the same time, of seeing a thousand possible realities flash before their eyes. For Yoruichi and Sui Feng, whose existence was defined by the laws of Reishi, the sudden, overwhelming influx of an entirely different energy system was a shock to the system. It was like fish being thrown from the ocean into the sky. They felt the vibrant, chaotic, and intensely alive energy of Naruto's world, chakra. It was everywhere, in the very air, in the earth, in every living thing. They burst out of the other side not into a calm room, but into the heart of a raging, unnatural blizzard. They were on a wide, elevated platform made of black steel. Beside a futuristic-looking armored train that was half buried in snow. The wind howled with the force of a hurricane, driving shards of ice horizontally through the air. Below the platform, the lights of a city glowed weakly through the storm. They were already under attack. Creatures made of multifaceted, crystalline ice were swarming the platform. They were shaped like wolves, but they moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Their forms flickering and phasing as if they weren't entirely real. Soldiers in advanced, slate gray armor that looked like a cross between samurai and modern eye. NF Antri were firing high-tech rifles that shot bolts of blue chakra. The bolts that hit their targets either passed harmlessly through the phasing creatures or caused them to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Only for the shards to immediately begin reforming. What in the name of the Soul King are those? Yoruichi shouted over the wind, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and battle lust. Sui Feng was already analyzing. Their forms are unstable. They don't exist consistently in our plane of reality. Conventional attacks are ineffective. Naruto didn't need an analysis. He could feel it. The creatures were not truly alive. They were constructs of ice, animated by a sliver of the same chaotic, dimensional energy he'd felt from the rift, and infused with corrupted natural energy. His sage senses screamed that they were a cancer on the world. He moved. He formed a Rasengan in his hand, the swirling blue sphere a beacon of warmth and order in the cold chaos. He slammed it into the nearest creature. The result was not just an explosion. The perfect rotation and stable chakra of his technique acted as a counter-frequency to the creature's inherent instability. The crystalline wolf didn't just shatter. It dissolved with a sound like breaking chimes, its energy neutralized completely. Yoruichi and Sui Feng joined in. Realizing brute force was secondary to technique, they focused their attacks. Yoruichi's lightning-fast strikes, infused with her own Ryutsu, disrupted the energy holding the creatures together. Sui Feng, ever the assassin, used precise, two-fingered strikes to their core, shattering the focal point of their energy. The three of them, a shinobi and two shinigami, tore through the ice creatures like a force of nature, their power on a level the local soldiers could only stare at in awe. As the last creature dissolved, a respectful quiet fell over the platform, the soldiers lowering their weapons. A group of figures approached, their heavy winter coats whipping in the wind. At their lead was the woman from the transmission. Daimyo Koyuki Kazuhana was even more striking in person. The years had sharpened the soft features of the actress into the confident, regal lines of a ruler. She wore no crown, only an expression of weary authority. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw Naruto, a flicker of recognition and relief crossing her face. Uzumaki Naruto, she said. Her voice clear and strong despite the howling wind. I had hoped, but I did not dare to believe. She then took in his two companions, her eyebrows rising in surprise at their strange black uniforms and the palpable aura of power they radiated. And you have brought guests. Daimyo Kazuhana, Naruto replied, giving a respectful nod. It was strange. The last time they had met, she was a client. And he was the brash young ninja. Now, they met as equals, two leaders facing a crisis. You have a problem. We came to help. That you did, Koyuki said, her gaze sweeping over the dissolving remains of the creatures. Come. I will brief you. The battlefield is not here, on the front lines. It is in the war room. They were escorted not to a lavish palace, but to a hardened, subterranea military bunker that served as the nation's command center. The walls were lined with holographic maps and communication consoles, manned by uniformed officers. This was the nerve center of a modern, technologically advanced nation at war. Koyuki stood before a large holographic map of her country, which was being slowly encroached upon by a spreading blue that represented the unnatural winter. We call them phantoms, she began. Her voice all business. They appeared 3 weeks ago, shortly after the sky wound opened. They are impervious to conventional weapons. Even our chakra-based railguns have limited effect. Their primary threat is not their lethality, but their temporal properties. A direct touch from a large one doesn't just freeze, it creates a zone of localized time dilation. We have entire platoons frozen in a single moment, living statues in an endless winter. She zoomed in on the map, showing tactical layouts and casualty reports. Her briefing was concise, intelligent, and filled with data. She was not a damsel asking for a hero, she was a general presenting a strategic problem to an allied commander. Naruto listened intently, his eyes narrowed in concentration. When she was finished, he didn't boast that he could destroy them all. He asked questions. What is their spawn rate relative to the storm's intensity? Do they have a command structure, or are they a hive mind? Have you tried creating a resonance cage, a perimeter of seals designed to emit a disruptive chakra frequency? Koyuki's eyes lit up with a spark of intellectual fire. He wasn't just a powerhouse, he was a strategist. He understood. The spawn rate is exponential. We believe them to be a hive mind, but we cannot locate a central nexus, she responded, matching his pace. A resonance cage. Our seal core attempted it. But the frequency required is beyond their ability to generate and maintain. The energy drain is too massive. I can generate the frequency, Naruto stated simply. They stood side by side, looking at the map, their minds already working in sync. The actress and the outcast had become rulers, and in this moment of crisis, they found an unexpected and powerful common ground. Yoruichi watched them with a knowing, feline smile. Sui Feng stood silently in the corner, her cold eyes missing nothing, recording every detail of this strange new world and the unexpected depths of the man she had been sent to kill. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Whispers of the Artisan. The war room in the heart of the land of snows. Command bunker was a marvel of chakra-infused technology. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing troop movements, atmospheric pressure charts, and real-time topographical scans of the ever-expanding storm front. The low, urgent hum of the machinery was a constant counterpoint to the hushed, tense voices of the strategists and technicians who worked tirelessly at their consoles. At the center of it all, Naruto, Koyuki, Yoruichi, and Sui Feng stood around a central holographic table, which displayed a swirling, chaotic image of the rift, the wound in the sky. For hours, they had analyzed, theorized, and planned. Koyuki's scientists, brilliant in their own right, fed them data on the phantoms, energy composition, a bizarre hybrid of natural energy and something else. It was this, something else, that was the key. It acted as a binding agent, forcing the ice and the corrupted nature energy into a semi-stable, hostile form. Naruto, drawing upon his deep understanding of Sage Mode, could feel its wrongness. Normal natural energy is harmonious, he explained, his brow furrowed in concentration as he stared at the display. It flows. It's the lifeblood of the world. This stuff, it's been twisted. It's been forced into a pattern that isn't its own. It's like someone took a living thing and replaced its DNA with programming code. It's a fascinatingly elegant piece of work, Yoruichi mused. Her arms crossed as she circled the hologram. To not just summon a creature, but to reprogram the very energy of a world to become the creature, the level of skill required is astronomical. It's a delicate, artistic kind of brutality. It was the word, artistic, that drew Sui Feng's attention. She had been silent for most of the strategic meeting, her contributions limited to SSING the phantoms, combat weaknesses from a purely physical standpoint. But her mind, trained to see patterns others missed, was sifting through every piece of data. She pushed past a technician and zoomed in on the energy signature of the rift itself. The swirling vortex was not entirely random. Woven into the chaos, almost invisible, was a framework. A complex, repeating pattern of lines and symbols that held the rift open. It was a seal. An impossibly complex, multi-dimensional Kido array. And there was a flair to its construction, a signature in the way the energy lines curved and intersected, that was chillingly familiar. The stabilization matrix, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes widened, a flicker of dawning horror in their dark depths. I've seen this formula before. The war room faded away. The hum of the machines was replaced by the cold, dead silence of a formal courtroom. Flashback. Seraite. Central 46 Compound, 110 years ago. A much younger Sui Feng, not yet a captain, not even a seated officer, stood at attention in the back of the great assembly hall. She was part of the Onmitsukido Honor Guard, a silent, black-clad statue tasked with observing the proceedings. It was the trial of Captain Kazuki Urahara, but it was the testimony regarding one of his subordinates that had captured the full, horrified attention of the Gote 13. On the stand, Captain Urahara, stripped of his white haori, his face grim and devoid of its usual whimsy, spoke with a heavy voice. His research was designated Project Chimera. Its stated goal was the reconciliation of disparate energy systems. A noble goal, on the surface. He was tasked with finding ways to allow Shinigami to better interact with the Reishi of Hawako Mundo. And his actual research. A disembodied voice from the shadowy council of Central 46 intoned. Urahara's jaw tightened. His actual research was heretical. He moved beyond simple interaction. He began attempts at forced fusion. He believed that the soul of a Shinigami and the soul of a hollow were not fundamentally different, but were merely incomplete expressions of a greater, more perfect whole. He captured live subjects. He began splicing them. A wave of revulsion went through the assembled captains. The prisoner was brought forward, bound in potent Kido restraints. He was a tall, aristocratic man with sharp, intelligent features and slicked back dark hair. He wore the uniform of the 12th Division, but there was a look of such profound, intellectual arrogance in his eyes that he seemed to be the one judging them, not the other way around. This was Kajiroza Inaba, 3rd seat of the 12th Division, a scientist whose genius was said to rival Urahara's own. Kajiroza Inaba, the voice of Central 46 boomed. You stand accused of performing forbidden experiments, of the murder of 17 Shinigami and 29 captured hollows, and of pursuing research that threatens the very balance of the worlds. How do you plead? Inaba looked up, a faint, contemptuous smile on his lips. He did not look at the shadowy figures of Central 46. He looked at the assembled captains, the most powerful beings in the Soul Society. Plead? He asked, his voice calm and resonant, filled with a chilling self-assurance. I plead for your enlightenment. You accuse me of heresy, when I am the only one among you who sees the truth. He shifted his gaze, and for a moment, it felt like he was looking directly at the young Sui Feng in the back. You see a world of flawed, disparate parts. Shinigami, hollow, Quincy, human. You cling to this division, this clumsy, imperfect status quo, because you lack the vision to see what could be. The Soul King, in his infinite wisdom, created the raw materials. He is the quarryman who provided the marble. But he was no sculptor. Quote. His voice grew in intensity, ringing with the passion of a zealot. I am the sculptor. I am the artisan. My work is not a crime. It is a sacred act of creation. I sought not to destroy the balance, but to perfect it. To create a single, unified being whose existence would be a symphony of Reishi, a perfect life form that transcends the crude limitations of your so-called natural order. You speak of souls. I have seen the code that underlies them. It is flawed, inefficient, and begging for a rewrite. My work was to be the grand revision. Captain Commander Yamamoto, who had been silent until now, opened one eye. A wave of immense, suffocating pressure filled the room. You played God with the lives of your comrades. Inaba laughed, a short, sharp, barking sound. Your comrades were meaningless sacrifices for a flawed ideal. I offered them the chance to be part of a perfect one. You are children, content to play with the mud pies the universe has given you. I sought to build a cathedral. You lack the imagination to understand. The verdict was swift. Kajiroza Inaba was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to be stripped of his Shin-Agami powers and imprisoned for 20,000 years in the Mukan. But as he was being led away, his final, chilling words echoed in the silent hall. You can imprison the artisan, but you cannot imprison the art. My designs are already complete. My whispers are already loose in the world. One day, you will see the beautiful, perfect world I have designed, and you will realize you were on the wrong side of history. Present. Land of Snow Command Bunker. Kajiroza Inaba, Sui Feng said, her voice a tense whisper. The name fell into the room with the weight of a tombstone. Yoruichi's eyes widened. She had been in exile when the trial took place, but she had heard the rumors. Inaba, Kazuki's brilliant, insane 3rd seat. We all thought he was rotting in the Mukan. This Kido signature is his. Sui Feng stated with absolute certainty, tapping the holographic display. This, Reishi splicing array, was the theoretical basis for all his work. It's a formula designed to forcibly weave different energy systems together. He must have escaped. And he has spent the last century refining his work. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The modified hollows in the hospital, infused with machinery. The soul-powered constructs. And now, the phantoms, forged from the natural energy of Naruto's world and bound by the chaotic energy of the rift. It was all Project Chimera, on a scale that was once unimaginable. He's not just trying to create a single perfect being anymore, Naruto said, his eyes dark with understanding. He's trying to merge the worlds themselves. To rewrite reality on a planetary scale. As the horrifying scope of their enemy's ambition settled upon them, every alarm in the war room began to shriek at once. A massive red alert flashed on the main screen. Daimyo-sama. A technician shouted, his voice strained with panic. Colossal energy signature emerging from the rift. It's 100 times larger than any phantom we've recorded. On the screen displaying the sky wound. A figure began to emerge. It descended from the swirling chaos not with the jerky, unnatural movements of the phantoms, but with a slow, regal grace. It was a humanoid figure, at least 50 meters tall. Crafted from the same shimmering, multifaceted crystal as the lesser creatures. It had a noble, androgynous face, devoid of expression, and a crown of jagged ice crystals floated above its head. In its hand, it held a colossal crystalline spear. It was not a mindless beast. It was a guardian, a king. The crystalline regent, Koyuki breathed, her face pale. It's heading for the capital. An officer reported. At its current pace, it will be here in 20 minutes. It's not trying to attack the city, Naruto said, his sage senses analyzing the torrent of energy pouring from the creature. It's a mobile amplifier. It's reinforcing the storm, accelerating the freezing process. If we don't stop it, this entire country will be a frozen statue in a matter of hours. There was no time for a protracted plan. They had one chance. Koyuki, I need you here, Naruto commanded, his voice shifting into the easy authority of a battlefield commander. Give me real-time analysis of its energy fluctuations and structural weaknesses. Tell me when and where to hit. Koyuki met his gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. You'll have it. Yoruichi, he continued, turning to her. You're the fastest thing here. You're the bait. I need you to draw its fire. Make it use its big attacks. Keep it focused on you. Yoruichi cracked her knuckles, a wide, predatory grin spreading across her face. A dance with a giant ice sculpture. Don't mind if I do. He finally looked at Sui Feng. His expression was serious, a look of professional respect. Captain, your Shikai, Naijeki Kesatsu. I've read the reports. 2 strikes in the same location means certain death. Can you use it on something that big? Sui Feng was taken aback. He knew the name and function of her Shikai. He hadn't just seen her as an obstacle. He had been analyzing her as a potential asset. If I can reach a weak point. Yes, she said, her voice clipped. Good, Naruto said. Because you're not going to have to reach it. I'm going to deliver you. The battle took place on the frozen plains a dozen kilometers from the capital city of Yukigakure. The crystalline regent moved with a ponderous grace that belied its immense speed. Yoruichi was a golden-black blur at its feet, her shunpo pushing the very limits of the art as she weaved between its crushing footsteps and the sweeps of its temporal spear. Each time the spear struck the ground, a wave of shimmering energy would erupt, and the very air would crystallize, time slowing to a near standstill in a 50-meter radius. It's creating temporal minefields. Koyuki's voice crackled over the communicator Naruto had been given. Yoruichi, don't get trapped. A little late for that, princess. Yoruichi's voice was strained as she somersaulted over a fresh wave of time-warping energy. Naruto, its core is exposed for a fraction of a second after it unleashes that wave. It's in the center of its chest. The window is 0.8 seconds, no more. Koyuki added. That was the moment. Sui Feng. Now, Naruto yelled. He grabbed her by the back of her Shihakusho. She didn't resist. She released her Shikai, the small, deadly stinger appearing on her finger. Jinteki Shikusetsu. Thwip. They vanished from their position 3 kilometers away and appeared in midair, directly before the regent's chest. The massive, glowing core, a vortex of swirling energy, was exposed. Time seemed to stretch. Sui Feng, her eyes burning with lethal focus, lunged forward and struck the core with her Shikai. A black butterfly pattern, no bigger than her hand, appeared on its glowing surface. First strike. Get out. Now. Koyuki screamed. The 0.8 second window was slamming shut. The regent's free hand was already moving to swat them like flies. Before it could connect, Naruto grabbed Sui Feng again. Thwip. They were gone, reappearing on a snowy ridge a kilometer away, just as the regent's hand smashed into its own chest with a sound like a glacier calving. The regent let out a silent, psychic roar of fury. It ignored Yoruichi and focused its full attention on the ridge, its core glowing with terrifying power. It's going to overload the area. Yoruichi shouted, Flash stepping away to a safe distance. We need another opening. Naruto said to Sui Feng, who was panting slightly, the strain of 2 instantaneous, high-G teleports taking its toll. For the first time, she looked at him not with anger or suspicion, but with a grudging, shocked respect. The level of trust and timing required for that maneuver was something she had only ever shared with one other person. Yoruichi, understanding the plan, reappeared before the regent, taunting it, drawing its attention, forcing it into another sweep of its spear. Another temporal wave. Another 0.8-second window. Again. Naruto commanded. Thwip. They were there. Sui Feng, with a piercing ki, struck the exact same spot, her stinger hitting the center of the black butterfly mark. The mark flared, and a larger, more intricate butterfly pattern of black energy spread across the regent's entire torso. Death in 2 steps. It was done. But the regent, though fatally wounded, was still a walking nuclear reactor of chaotic energy. It began to glow, its crystalline body cracking as it prepared to detonate in a final, spiteful cataclysm. This is my part, Naruto said. He leapt into the air, creating 2 shadow clones. He entered Sage mode in an instant, the orange pigmentation flashing around his eyes. He gathered a colossal amount of chakra and natural energy into his hands. Senpo. Futon. Chudama Recenshuriken. Sage Art. Wind Release. Ultra Big Ball Recenshuriken. A gigantic, spinning shuriken of pure wind energy, larger than the regent itself and screaming with a sound that tore the air apart, formed above him. He hurled it downwards. The attack struck the imploding regent, and instead of a massive explosion, the Recenshuriken's billion microscopic wind blades began to sever its connection to the world on a cellular, spiritual level. The regent didn't explode. It was completely, utterly, and safely annihilated, dissolving into a harmless flurry of snow. Silence fell on the plains. The raging blizzard began to subside, the sky wound above seeming to shrink slightly, its chaotic energy momentarily quelled. On the ridge, Sui Feng stared at Naruto, who landed softly on the snow, dismissing Sage mode. She had just been a willing passenger, a living weapon delivered by a form of movement that defied all logic. He had trusted her to do her job with perfect faith, and she, in turn, had placed her life completely in his hands. It was the kind of battlefield synergy she had only ever dreamed of. A curt, almost imperceptible nod. It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. Naruto simply smiled back, a tired but satisfied expression on his face. He looked up at the rift. They had won the battle. But Kajirosa Inaba, the mad artisan, was still out there, wisp, earing his designs into the fabric of their worlds. The war had just begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Karakura Siege. In the wake of the regent's defeat, a fragile, crystalline peace settled over the snowy plains. The violent, unnatural blizzard had calmed to a gentle snowfall, and the wound in the sky, while still present, seemed less angry, its chaotic energies momentarily pacified. In the command bunker, a wave of relieved, exhausted cheers had erupted from the technicians and officers. For the first time in weeks, they had won a decisive victory. They had pushed back the winter. Koyuki stood with Naruto, Yoruichi, and Sui Feng on a high balcony overlooking the capital, the city lights twinkling under a blanket of fresh snow. The air was cold, clean, and blessedly free of the temporal distortions that had plagued the nation. I've never seen anything like it, Koyuki said, her voice filled with a quiet awe as she looked at Naruto. The power you wield, it's the stuff of legends. Our legends. Power is just a tool. Naruto replied, his gaze still fixed on the distant rift. It's how you use it that matters. We bought you time, Koyuki, but Inaba is still out there. He'll adapt. Then we will adapt with him. She stated, a new fire of resolve in her eyes. With the data we've gathered from the regent, my engineers believe they can replicate the disruptive frequency of your Recenshuriken. We can build defensive pylons. We can fight back. A rare, genuine smile touched Naruto's lips. He saw in her the same indomitable will that had rebuilt Konoha from a crater. They were kindred spirits, builders in a world of destroyers. It was in this moment of quiet victory, of shared hope, that the first tremor of disaster struck. It was not a sound or a shaking of the earth. It was a violent, psychic lurch within Naruto's own soul. He gasped, his hand flying to his chest as an agonizing pain, sharp and visceral, erupted from his very core. It was not a physical wound. It felt as if a vital part of him, miles and dimensions away, had just been stabbed with a poisoned blade. His connection to the Horaitian marker he'd left with Urahara, his one stable anchor in the other world, was screaming. It wasn't a message of words. It was a raw, unfiltered broadcast of pure, unadulterated panic. He felt the explosive report of dozens of spiritual pressure signatures erupting at once. The acrid taste of ozone from emergency keto barriers being shattered, and a wave of terror so profound it almost buckled his knees. Naruto. Yoruichi was at his side in an instant, her hand on his shoulder. What is it? Karakura town, he choked out, his vision swimming. It's under attack. A full-scale invasion. Urahara. The shop. They're in trouble. He could feel it through the marker. Urahara's own Ryutsu, usually a calm, deep ocean, was now a raging storm, spread thin as he tried to manage a dozen threats at once. Inaba. Sui Feng realized aloud, her face paling. It was a feint. The regent wasn't his main attack. It was a distraction, to draw the strongest pieces off the board. The strategic brilliance of it was as chilling as it was horrifying. While they were fighting for the fate of one nation, Inaba had launched his true assault on the nexus of their operations, at the one place, and the one time, it was most vulnerable. The first sign of the invasion in Karakura was not a monstrous roar or a sudden explosion, but a subtle, sickening tear in the fabric of the evening sky. Then another. And another. All across the city, the air shimmered and split open, revealing dozens of swirling, chaotic vortexes identical to the one that hovered over the land of snow. It was as if the sky itself had contracted a disease. From these wounds poured Kajiroza Inaba's true army. They were not the clumsy, repurposed hollows from the hospital, nor the elemental phantoms of the snow. These were his masterpieces, the culmination of a century of twisted artistry. There were the chrome-plated arachnid constructs. The hunter-killers, now reinforced and moving with terrifying speed. But with them came something new. Creatures that were a seamless, horrifying fusion of hollow and machine. Their bodies were the pale, segmented bone of a Vastolord-class hollow, but their limbs were articulated mechanical appendages ending in energy cannons, their masks integrated with glowing red optics. And the gaping hole in their chests housed not emptiness, but a humming, malevolent chakra core reverse-engineered from Naruto's own energy signature. They were walking blasphemies, a perfect, terrible synthesis of the two worlds. Kazuki Urahara saw it all unfold on his monitors in the split second it began. Tessai. He roared, his voice losing every trace of its usual levity. Full lockdown. Activate the Karakura Grand Barrier. Protocol 7. Right away, sir. The massive man bellowed, slamming his fist down on a large, red button on a hidden console. Throughout the Urahara Shoten, steel shutters slammed down, and powerful Keto seals flared to life, weaving a shield of crackling golden energy around the small, unassuming building. In the vast chamber below, the artificial sky turned a blood red. And the very air thrummed with defensive power. Jinta. Ururu. Defensive positions at the main entrance. Urahara commanded. But his eyes were on a single, quiet figure who emerged from a previously sealed doorway in the back of the chamber. It was a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, with long, pale green hair and wide, fearful eyes. She wore a simple white dress and clutched her hands together nervously. This was Kujo Nozomi. For the last several months, she had been Urahara's secret guest, a refugee he had found hiding in the Dongai. A runaway. Nozomi, Urahara said, his voice softening slightly but still urgent. You know whose energy signature is leading this attack, don't you? She flinched, her eyes filling with a terror that was old and deep. It's him, she whispered, her voice trembling. He's found me. My creator. Kajiroza Inaba. He's not here for you. Not specifically, Urahara corrected, trying to keep her focused. He's here for the shop, for my research. And to eliminate any opposition while Naruto is gone. But he will not hesitate to reclaim his property, if he finds you. The first impacts rocked the barrier. The entire underground cavern shook. And dust rained down from the ceiling. Outside, dozens of constructs were throwing themselves against the golden shield, their attacks creating a cacophony of explosions. I can't fight him, Nozomi stammered, shrinking back. I'm not a warrior. You are a survivor, Urahara said, his gaze sharp. He pointed to the monitor, which showed Jinta and Ururu, barely children, street. Anding defiantly before the main entrance, their own Ryutsu flaring as they prepared to defend their home. They are fighting. Tessai is fighting. Everyone is fighting. You don't have to be a warrior. But you have to make a choice. Another, larger impact slammed into the barrier, and a crack appeared in the golden energy shield. A hunter-killer construct squeezed through the gap, its red eyes locking onto Jinta. It was that sight of the brash, loud-mouthed boy who sometimes shared his candy with her standing in the path of a killing machine, that finally broke through Nozomi's fear. A fire ignited in her eyes, a desperate, protective instinct overwhelming a lifetime of terror. No, she screamed. She threw her hands forward. A wave of brilliant, shimmering golden light, far purer and more powerful than the Keto barrier, erupted from her palms. It formed a solid, translucent wall in front of the children, just as the construct fired a blast of concentrated energy. The blast hit the wall and dissipated harmlessly, absorbed by Nozomi's shield. She was not a warrior. But her power was that of the ultimate guardian. She was the shield her creator had never intended her to be. The first explosion shook the ramen stand, sending bowls and chopsticks clattering to the floor. Tatsuki Arasawa was on her feet in an instant, shoving a terrified Orihime behind her as Chad moved to stand beside her. His massive frame a solid wall. Panic erupted in the streets. People screamed and ran, a tide of terror sweeping through the district. Through the window, Tatsuki saw one of the new, hybridized hollows land in the middle of the street, its energy cannon charging. It fired a blast of spiraling purple energy that vaporized a car and sent people flying. Chad, Orihime, get everyone out of here. Head for the river, Tatsuki commanded, grabbing her ever-present Bakken from where it had been leaning against the wall. Tatsuki, you can't fight that thing. Orihime cried, her face pale with fear. I'm not fighting it. I'm buying you time. Tatsuki shot back. Go. Now. Chad hesitated, then nodded, understanding the grim necessity of the situation. He began herding the panicked civilians. His calm presence a small island of stability in the chaos, while Orihime immediately began tending to the wounded, her shunshunrika glowing softly around her hands. Tatsuki burst out of the ramen stand and into the nightmare. Her targets were not the colossal hybrids, that was suicide. Her targets were the smaller, faster skitter drones that were emerging from the rifts, their bladed limbs and needle-like appendages designed not to kill, but to herd and capture the fleeing humans. She moved with the focused, economic grace of a master martial artist. She wasn't a Shinigami with superhuman speed, but she was faster, stronger, and tougher than any normal human. A drone lunged at a fallen child. Tatsuki was there, her Bakken a brown blur, smashing its primary optic sensor with a perfectly executed strike. She flowed into a spinning kick that shattered one of its legs, sending it screeching back. She was a whirlwind of controlled fury in the midst of chaos. She couldn't fly. She couldn't shoot energy beams. But she could fight. She could stand her ground. She could hold the line. For every person that escaped behind her, for every child that Orihime healed, Tatsuki paid the price in bruises, cuts, and a burning exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. But she did not fall. She was Tatsuki Arasawa. And this was her town. The battle for Karakura raged on three fronts. In his underground bunker, Urahara was the general, frantically redirecting power to the failing barrier, coordinating with the few allies he had, and trying to find a weakness in the enemy's coordinated assault. His face was grim, lit by the flickering red light of the emergency displays. The enemy was too numerous, too powerful. They were being systematically overwhelmed. Before the gates of the shop, Nozomi was the bastion. She stood, tears streaming down her face from fear and exertion, her hands held out as she maintained the golden shield that was the only thing keeping the army at bay. Behind her, Tessai used high-level Bakudo spells to reinforce her shield, while Jinta and Ururu fired their own attacks at any creature that came too close. It was a desperate, heroic, and ultimately doomed defense. And in the streets, Tatsuki, Chad, and Orihime were the heart. They were the spirit of humanity refusing to break, fighting a hopeless battle for the simple, profound reason that it was the right thing to do. They saved who they could, healed who they could, and held the line until they could hold it no more. Urahara watched a new, massive energy signature building at the city center. It was Inaba's endgame. A massive Reishi chakra bomb, designed to wipe the town off the map and tear the dimensional rift wide open permanently. They were out of options. They were out of time. He looked at the Hiraishin Kunai, Naruto's anchor, sitting in its containment field. There was one last, desperate gamble. He couldn't send a message. But he could send a feeling. He diverted every last scrap of power he had. Not into the barriers, but into a single, focused Kido spell aimed at the kunai. It was not a communication spell. It was a spell of pure, amplified emotion. He poured all of his desperation, all of his strategic panic. The psychic screams of the city, and a single, clear image of the burning town into the spell and fired it at the quantumly entangled marker. Back in the calm, snowy landscape of the land of snow. The psychic blast hit Naruto like a physical blow. The raw, unfiltered agony and terror of his friends, of the town he had inadvertently come to protect, flooded his senses. They're losing. He gasped, stumbling to his knee. He's going to destroy the whole town. There's no way back, Sui Feng said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. The gateway is closed. Then we kick the damn door down, Naruto snarled, pushing himself to his feet. He looked at Koyuki, his eyes filled with a desperate apology. I have to go. I'm sorry. Koyuki placed a hand on his arm. Her expression firm and understanding. Go, she said. A leader's place is with their people. These are your people now, too. Go, and save them. Naruto turned to the Hiraishin kunai he still held. The one linked to the marker in the land of snow. It was a key, a quantum address. Urahara had sent a signal through. It stood to reason a signal could be sent back. A much, much bigger signal. Kurama, he yelled internally. I need everything you've got. It will be an uncontrolled jump, Naruto. The fox roared back, but there was no hesitation. It could tear you apart, or throw you into the gaps between worlds. They're my friends, Kurama. A torrent of blistering, crimson Biju chakra erupted from Naruto, a pillar of raw power that melted the snow for 100 meters around him and sent a shockwave through the air. He poured all of it, every last drop, into the small, three-pronged kunai. The space around the blade began to warp and fracture, not opening into a controlled vortex, but shattering like a broken mirror. It's a long way down. Yoruichi yelled, a wild grin on her face as she grabbed onto Naruto's shoulder. Sui Feng, with a grim expression of resolve, did the same on the other side. See you later, Koyuki. Naruto shouted. With a final, deafening roar of power, he shoved the overloaded kunai into the fractured space before them. Reality broke. They were thrown into the violent, chaotic transit once more, but this time it was 1,000 times worse. They were tumbled through a storm of raw creation, and with a final, bone-jarring lurch, they were spit out into their own dimension. They emerged high in the night sky. Below them, Karakura town was on fire. Buildings were collapsing. Explosions lit the darkness. And at the center of the city, a sphere of swirling, unstable purple energy was growing, preparing to detonate and consume everything. Dozens of hybridized monsters and machines swarmed through the streets. The siege was at its peak. Their home was about to be annihilated. And they had just arrived on the battlefield. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Hearts in Unison. Their arrival was not a whisper, but a thunderclap. High above the inferno of Karakura town, reality tore open in a chaotic, uncontrolled schism of light and energy, and three figures were flung from its depths. For a heart-stopping moment, they fell, silhouettes against the blood-red glow of the burgeoning energy bomb at the city's core. Then, with an assertion of will that seemed to momentarily calm the very air around him, Naruto arrested their descent. He stood on the wind itself. His borrowed black shihakusho whipping around him, the remnants of Kurama's crimson chakra cloaking him in a fearsome aura. Yoruichi and Sui Feng landed silently on the air beside him, their expressions grim masks of fury. Below them lay a war zone. The scale of the invasion was breathtakingly horrific. Inaba's army of chimeras moved through the streets with systematic, inhuman efficiency. Their energy cannons carving swaths of destruction. The city's defenders were scattered, isolated pockets of desperate resistance against an overwhelming tide. And at the heart of it all, the Reishi chakra bomb pulsed like a malignant star, its gravitational pull warping the buildings around it, its detonation imminent. There was no time for shock. There was no time for rage. There was only the cold, clear calculus of the battlefield. Naruto's mind, forged in the crucible of the Fourth Great Ninja War, processed the entire chaotic scene in a single, sweeping glance, his sage senses drinking in every detail. He saw the faltering shield around Urahara's shop, the desperate street-level fight near the river, and the unstoppable advance of elite units towards the city center. "This is the plan," he said, his voice a calm, authoritative command that cut through the roar of the battle. It was not the voice of the boy they knew, but the voice of the seventh Hokage he was meant to become. Yoruichi. Eastern Sector. The hybrids are most numerous there. Their organic components are a weakness. Dismantle them. No survivors. Yoruichi's golden eyes burned with a fierce light. She gave a single, sharp nod. Her body already coiled. With pleasure. Sui Feng. Western Sector. Your targets are the pure constructs, the hunter-killers. Your Shikai is wasted on them, but your speed and Akuta are perfect for disabling their power cores. Prioritize the units hurting civilians. Cripple their command structure. Sui Feng's gaze met his. There was no argument, no hesitation. She saw not an undisciplined anomaly, but a commander who understood her capabilities perfectly. Acknowledged. The bomb, he finished, his own eyes narrowing on the pulsating sphere of purple energy, is mine. They broke. Yoruichi was a streak of black lightning, descending upon the eastern streets with the fury of a storm goddess. Sui Feng was a flicker of shadow, a silent, precise instrument of death weaving through the western district. And Naruto flew towards the city center, a golden-red meteor on a collision course with Armageddon. The bomb was a masterpiece of perverse science. Naruto could feel its construction as he drew closer. It was a perfectly balanced, oscillating fusion of plus and minus spiritual energies, stabilized by a cage of reprogrammed chakra that acted as both a containment field and a detonation trigger. It was designed to not just explode, but to erase everything within a 5-mile radius and leave behind a permanent, self-sustaining dimensional wound. Brute force would only set it off faster. This was not a problem to be punched. It was a seal to be undone. He landed softly on the warped asphalt before the pulsating sphere, the heat wash of it making the air shimmer. He held out his hands, palms facing the bomb. He closed his eyes, sinking deep into himself, past his own power, past Kurama's, to the very foundation of his lineage. He reached for the knowledge encoded in his blood, the ancient, powerful art of the Uzumaki clan. The art of the seal. Golden chains, glowing with a light so pure and so potent it seemed to push back the surrounding darkness, erupted from his back. But these were not the physical chains Kushina had wielded. They were constructs of pure, perfectly controlled senjutsu chakra. The Kongo Fusa. The chains did not lash out. They moved with the deliberate, intricate grace of a master calligrapher's brush. They wove through the air, forming a complex, three-dimensional seal array around the bomb. Each link that snapped into place was a different kanji. A different command in the fundamental language of energy and existence. Isolate. Contain. Compress. Deconstruct. Neutralize. It was a battle of wills, of science versus art. Inaba's programming code, his cold, sterile logic, fought against Naruto's intuitive, living art. The purple energy of the bomb surged, trying to break the golden cage. But the Uzumaki seals were designed to restrain gods and demons. Against them, Inaba's construct, for all its power, was little more than a raging beast in a celestial prison. The chains tightened. The massive sphere of energy, 100 meters wide, began to shrink. It was compressed, its volatile energies forced back in on themselves, its fusion reaction starved of space. It shrank from a star to a moon, to a boulder, to a pebble. Finally, with a sound like a sigh, the last of its light was extinguished, and the golden chains absorbed the last of its power, before dissolving harmlessly into the air. The immediate threat was over. Now came the reckoning. With the bomb neutralized, Naruto, Yoruichi, and Sui Feng became a reaping whirlwind. They swept through the city, their movements a coordinated dance of utter devastation. The invading army, deprived of its endgame and facing three beings of unimaginable power, broke in an instant. The battle turned into a slaughter, then a rout. Within 15 minutes of their arrival, the last of Inaba's chimeras was a pile of smoking scrap and dissolving spirit particles. As the first, Tentative rays of dawn pierced the smoke-filled sky. A profound, exhausted silence fell over the ruined city. The reunion at the Urahara Shoten was a quiet, solemn affair. The barrier was down, the steel shutters retracted, revealing a shopfront scarred by energy blasts but miraculously intact. Urahara stood at the entrance. His bucket hat askew, his face smudged with soot, a weary but deeply relieved smile on his lips. Beside him, Tessai was leaning heavily against the doorframe, high.'s massive form trembling with exhaustion. Jinta and Ururu were passed out on a pile of cushions just inside. Tatsuki, Chad, and Orihime were the first to arrive, their faces a mixture of grime, blood, and utter disbelief. Tatsuki's bakken was splintered, and her knuckles were raw, but she stood tall. As Naruto landed before them, her first instinct took over. She walked up to him and punched him in the shoulder. A blow that would have staggered a normal man. "You cut it a little close, idiot," she said, her voice rough with emotion, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Naruto just smiled, a tired, gentle expression. "Sorry. Traffic was bad." It was then that he saw her. Nozomi. She was hiding behind Urahara, peering out at him with wide, timid eyes. Her golden shield had saved them all, but the battle had clearly taken a terrifying toll on her. When their eyes met, she flinched and looked away, as if ashamed. Later, after the immediate chaos had subsided and the wounded were being tended to, Naruto found her in the quiet of the underground chamber. She was sitting on a rock, staring at her own hands as if they were alien things. He sat down a few feet away, not speaking at first, just sharing the silence. "I'm a monster," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He made me. This power, it's his. I'm just one of his weapons." Naruto looked at his own right hand, flexing his fingers. "When I was a kid," he began. His voice soft, "everyone in my village looked at me like I was a monster. A demon fox that had taken human form. They were afraid of me, they hated me, and for a long time, I believed them." Nozomi looked up, her fearful eyes wide with surprise. "There was a monster inside me," he continued, meeting her gaze. "A being of immense power and rage. It wasn't my power, not really. It was just there. A part of me I didn't ask for. And for years, I thought that's all I was. Just its vessel, its cage." He paused, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "But power isn't who you are, Nozomi. It's just a tool. It doesn't matter who made the tool, or for what reason. The only thing that matters is the hand that wields it. Tonight, you didn't use your power to hurt anyone. You used it to protect. You used it to save our friends. That power isn't Inaba's anymore. You made it yours." Tears began to stream down Nozomi's face, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of catharsis. Of a profound, soul-deep relief. He didn't just see her power, he saw her. He understood. He found Tatsuki in the ruins of the park where the festival had been held. The stalls were charred skeletons. And the paper lanterns were torn and scattered like fallen leaves. The sun was rising properly now, casting long shadows across the debris. She was kneeling, carefully placing a small, makeshift memorial of flowers and unlit incense at the base of a scorched tree. For the civilians who hadn't made it. "Hey," he said quietly, approaching her. She looked up, her face streaked with dirt. Her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Hey." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunrise paint the smoke-filled sky in hues of orange and pink. "I felt useless," she said suddenly, her voice low. "You guys, you're like gods, tearing apart monsters. And I was down here with a piece of wood, just trying to keep people from getting trampled." "Tatsuki," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Turning to face her. "Yoruichi can't heal a wounded child. Sui Feng can't calm a panicking crowd. I can't be in a dozen places at once, pulling people from collapsing buildings." He looked down at her bruised and battered hands. "We fought the army. You saved the people. Which one do you think is more important?" She stared at him, her tough exterior crumbling just a little. He wasn't patronizing her. He wasn't placating her. He was stating a simple, profound truth. He saw her contribution not as lesser, but as different, and equally vital. "Thanks, Naruto," she whispered, a real, weary smile finally reaching her eyes. Theirs was a bond forged not in displays of power, but in a shared, stubborn refusal to let the world burn. It was simple. It was human. And it was unbreakable. Sui Feng sought him out. He was in a quiet corner of the cavern, rewrapping the worn grips of his kunai. She approached with her usual silent steps and stood before him, her posture rigid. Uzumaki. She began, her voice formal. Captain, he replied, not looking up from his work. The maneuver at the crystalline regent's core, she said, getting straight to the point. And your command decisions upon your return to Karakura. They were tactically sound. Coming from her, it was the highest of compliments. You followed the orders, he said, finally looking up. That's what made them work. You trusted me. You trusted me first, she countered, a flicker of something vulnerable in her eyes. You placed me in the critical position. You trusted my shikai and my ability to execute under extreme pressure. You did not treat me as a subordinate, or as her replacement. You treated me as a fellow commander. The unspoken name of Yoruichi hung in the air between them. He had seen her not as Yoruichi's shadow, but as her own warrior. I saw what was there, he said simply. A captain of the Gote 13. One of the deadliest assassins in the Soul Society. Why would I see anything else? Sui Feng was silent for a long moment. A lifetime of trying to measure up, of living in a shadow cast by a woman she both worshipped and resented, had just been swept aside by the simple, direct respect of an outsider. He saw her for her own strength, her own merit. Your methods are unconventional, she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. They are undisciplined and fly in the face of established protocol. But they are effective. She gave him the same curt, almost invisible nod she had on the battlefield. My official report will reflect this. It was her way of saying thank you. It was her way of offering an alliance. He found Yoruichi on the roof of the shop, watching the sun climb higher into the sky. The city below was a patchwork of ruin and resilience. She had shed the torn shihakusho and was dressed in a simple orange top and black pants, her violet hair unbound and flowing in the morning breeze. The playful, teasing mask was gone. Her golden eyes held a deep, profound weariness. Naruto sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. For a long time, they just watched the city, a comfortable silence stretching between them. It's a lonely business, isn't it? She finally said, her voice a low murmur. Being the one who's always supposed to have the answer. The one who's faster, stronger. The one everyone looks to when the sky starts falling. He knew exactly what she meant. It was the weight of being the hero, the pillar. The secret fear that if you ever stumbled, everything would collapse with you. You get used to the weight, he replied, his voice equally quiet. But you never get used to the quiet after the battle's over. The quiet is the worst part, she agreed. She turned her head, her golden eyes meeting his. I haven't had an equal in a very, very long time, Naruto. Someone who can keep up. Someone who understands what it's like to move so fast the rest of the world feels like it's standing still. Her gaze was intense, stripped bare of all artifice. When we fought together, back in the land of snow, and just now, it didn't feel like fighting. It felt like a conversation. Like we didn't need words. He had felt it too. The seamless synergy. The perfect, unspoken understanding of timing, of movement, of intent. He bent the rules of space. She broke the laws of motion. It was two halves of a perfect whole. I'm not from your world, Yoruichi. He said softly, the unspoken truth hanging between them. I'm still trying to find my way home. I know, she said, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his. It wasn't a passionate embrace or a dramatic kiss. It was a simple, profound connection. A quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between them in the heart of the storm. But while you're here, it's nice not to be the only one on the rooftop. As the sun cast their long shadows over the broken city, a new, unspoken understanding settled between them. It was a promise of companionship, a solace for two lonely gods who had, against all odds, found each other in the wreckage of a war. Just then, a faint buzz came from Naruto's pocket. It was the communicator Koyuki had given him. He answered, and Urahara's voice came through, tinny and filled with static. Naruto, you there? I've managed to punch a signal through the rift, but it won't last. Someone wants to talk to you. A moment of static, and then Koyuki's voice, clear and strong, filled the silence. Naruto. Can you hear me? Your signal vanished. We feared the worst. Are you alright? We're fine, Koyuki. Naruto said, a tired smile returning to his face as he looked at Yoruichi. Just cleaning up the mess. We're all fine. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The God of the Empty Sky. The dawn that followed the siege was a fragile, wounded thing. It painted the sky in soft pastels that did little to hide the ugly, black scars of smoke still rising from the ruins of Karakura town. The immediate, frantic energy of survival had given way to a profound, bone-deep weariness. For 24 hours, the city held its breath. The 4th Division, under the serene and unnervingly efficient command of Retsu Unohana, handled the cleansing of the lingering spiritual corruption and the treatment of the wounded. Urahara, Tessai, and a newly confident Nozomi worked tirelessly to reinforce the town's battered spiritual defenses. Tatsuki, Chad, and Orihime became pillars of the community, organizing relief efforts, their quiet strength a beacon for the shaken human population. In the midst of this fragile recovery, the architects of the victory gathered in the subterranean chamber. The mood was not celebratory. It was grim. They had won a battle, but the architect of the war, Kajiroza Inaba, remained at large. His army was a disposable asset, Urahara stated, his usual levity completely absent. He stood before a massive holographic display showing a swirling, complex energy model. The data from the attack on the land of snow, combined with the energy residue from the Karakura siege, has allowed me to map the flow of his power. He is not hiding in our world, our Naruto's. He has created a sanctum for himself. A pocket dimension, a tumor growing in the interstitial space between our realities. He zoomed in on the model. At the center of the swirling energies was a single, stable point. The nexus. It's the heart of the dimensional rift, the source of the instability. He has made it his fortress and his laboratory. Every experiment, every attack, has been designed to feed it, to grow it. He is no longer just trying to merge the worlds, he is trying to replace them with his own. Then we take the fight to him, Sui Feng said, her voice sharp and decisive. The respect she now held for Naruto had solidified into a fierce, focused alliance. She would see this mission through to its end. It is not so simple, Captain, Urahara cautioned. The space betway, N worlds, the Dongai, is dangerous enough. But the Nexus is a realm of pure, unmitigated chaos. The laws of physics, of Kido, of chakra, they do not apply there. It is his domain. On his home ground, he would be a god. Then we're going to have to kill a god, Naruto said, his voice quiet but resonant with an unshakable resolve. He looked at the faces around him. Yoruichi, her expression a mask of deadly seriousness, Sui Feng, her eyes burning with a cold fire. Nozomi, her fear now tempered by a newfound determination. He would not ask them to follow him into such a battle. He didn't have to. I've designed something for the journey, Urahara said, a flicker of his old, manic inventor's grin returning. He gestured, and a section of the cavern floor retracted, revealing a small, sleek, skeletal craft. It was crafted from a black, spirit particle absorbent alloy, covered in complex Kido seals, and propelled by what looked like a contained vortex of energy. The Shinanmaru, the Abyss Pilgrim. It can cut through the dimensional strata and should, theoretically, protect you from the worst of the chaos. Nozomi, your unique reishi manipulation abilities will be vital. You will need to actively reinforce its shields from the inside. Nozomi's hands clenched at her sides, but she gave a firm nod. She would not hide again. The mission was set. Naruto, Yoruichi, and Sui Feng would be the spearhead, the assault team. Nozomi would be their shield, their pilot through the maelstrom. It was a desperate, near-suicidal charge into the heart of madness. The journey through the dimensional corridors was a silent, claustrophobic nightmare. Through the main viewport of the Shinanmaru, they watched their own reality dissolve into a rushing, infinite tunnel of gray, formless energy. The SMALL craft shuddered and groaned as chaotic forces battered against Nozomi's shimmering golden shield, which enveloped the ship like a second skin. Approaching the Nexus boundary, she reported, her voice strained. Sweat beading on her forehead. The energy is wrong. It feels like screaming. They breached the boundary. The violent, gray passage gave way to a sudden, breathtaking view of an impossible world. They were floating in a sky that was a swirling vortex of violet and gold, where clouds of raw chakra and rivers of pure reishi flowed into one another. Below them was a landscape born from a fever dream. A street that looked exactly like the main thoroughfare of Konoha, complete with the Hokage monument carved into a distant mountain, was twisted at a 90-degree angle, its buildings running up the side of a Seraite-style fortress wall. A forest of giant, crystalline trees grew from a sea of what looked like bubbling, savory ramen broth. Gravity seemed optional. Chunks of architecture and landscape floated in the air like islands in a surreal archipelago. This was the Nexus, a world built from the stolen memories and fundamental energies of two realities, stitched together by a madman's vision. He didn't just merge the worlds, Yoruichi breathed, her voice filled with a horrified awe. He dissected them and wore their skins. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. From he crystalline forests and impossible architecture, Inaba's perfected guards arose. They were beautiful, terrifying things. They had the lithe, powerful forms of a Rancor, the disciplined movements of Shinigami. And their bodies flowed with visible chakra networks like those of a Hyuga. They moved with Shunpo but through projectiles of condensed nature energy. They were the symphony of his life's work. Engaging, Sui Feng said. Her voice cold. The hatch of the Shinanmaru opened. Naruto, Yoruichi, and Sui Feng leapt out, landing on a floating island of Seraite rooftops. Nozomi kept the ship cloaked. Her shields their only stable point of reference in this chaotic world. The battle was a blur of seamless, devastating synergy. Naruto was the anchor, his sage mode allowing him to predict the shifts in the unstable environment. His Hiraishin placing his teammates in perfect attack vectors. Yoruichi was a current of unstoppable force, her Shunko enhanced Hakuta shattering the guard's defenses. Sui Feng was the scalpel. Her movements precise, her strikes finding the single, critical weak point in each chimera's core. They moved as one organism, a three-headed dragon of combat that laid waste to Inaba's honor guard. They fought their way to the center of the Nexus, to a colossal, floating citadel that was a twisted fusion of the Hokage Tower and the Central 46 compound. At its peak, on an open-air throne platform, they found him. Kajiroza Inaba was no longer a man. He had become an icon of his own religion. He was fused to a throne of black crystal and pulsating energy conduits. His old Shihakusho now interwoven with flowing robes of pure, solidified chakra. His skin was pale as marble, and intricate, glowing reishi circuits ran across his body like divine tattoos. The Aroga NCE in his eyes had been replaced by a serene, terrifying certainty. He was no longer a sculptor. He was the finished sculpture. Welcome, his voice echoed, seeming to come from the very air around them. Welcome, my imperfections. I have been waiting for you. I wanted you to see the beautiful world you fought so hard to prevent. This isn't a world, Inaba, Naruto retorted, landing on the platform. It's a prison. A monument to your own ego. Ego. Inaba chuckled, a sound like shifting glass. Is it ego to correct a flawed design? Is it ego to bring order to chaos? Your worlds are dying, Uzumaki. They bleed and scar and fade. Division is a sickness. I am the cure. I have combined the vibrant, living energy of chakra with the eternal, spiritual permanence of reishi. I have created a perfect, self-sustaining reality. I have achieved what your soul king could only dream of. I am the god of this new, perfect sky. He rose from his throne, the conduits detaching from his body. The power that rolled off him was immense. A tidal wave of perfectly harmonized chakra and reishi that dwarfed anything they had ever felt before. Now, he said, his eyes glowing with divine power, it is time for the final revision. The erasure of the flawed prototypes. He raised a hand. The very platform beneath their feet dissolved into light, forcing them into the air. He didn't attack them with blasts of energy. He attacked them with reality itself. A forest of crystalline trees erupted from nothing, attempting to impale them. A river of boiling chakra surged upwards. He pointed at Sui Feng, and the space around her began to crackle. Her own Ryutsu being forcibly converted into inert matter. Nozomi's shield flared into existence around the captain, protecting her at the last second. From the hidden Shinanmaru, Urahara's voice, filtered through a Kido communicator, crackled in their ears. Direct attacks are useless. He's tethered to the Nexus itself. He's regenerating his energy and physical form from the entire dimension. You have to sever his connection. The team's objective shifted instantly. Koyuki's voice joined Urahara's, her analysis crisp and clear from a world away. We're seeing it from here. There are 3 primary energy conduits, feeding the throne. They are shielded. You have to destroy them. The true battle began. It was a symphony of chaos and perfect coordination. Inaba, with his god-like power, warped the battlefield at will. But he was one being against a perfectly unified team. Yoruichi, draw his attention to the east. Naruto commanded. Yoruichi became a blur. A series of feints and attacks that forced Inaba to focus his reality-bending powers on her. While he was occupied, Naruto looked to Sui Feng. The conduits are too heavily shielded for a conventional attack. I need the big one. Sui Feng's eyes widened. Her Bankai. Here, in this unstable dimension, the recoil could kill her. But she saw the absolute trust in Naruto's eyes. She nodded. Bankai. She roared. A colossal golden missile launcher, Jakuho Reikoben, materialized over her shoulder, a weapon so powerful it was limited to 1 shot every 3 days. The platform is too unstable for her to fire. Urahara warned. I'll make her one. Naruto yelled. He flew into the air above the first conduit, gathering an immense amount of sage chakra. Senpo. Odama Rasengan. He didn't throw the massive Rasengan. He slammed it down onto the empty air, and instead of exploding, he held its form, the perfectly stable, rotating chakra creating a solid, flat disk of pure energy, a temporary island in the chaotic sky. Thwip. He teleported Sui Feng onto the platform. Fire. With a scream of pure effort, Sui Feng fired her Bankai. A torrent of golden energy, a miniature sun, roared Acros. The nexus and struck the first conduit. The shields shattered, and the conduit exploded in a shower of light. One down. Inaba roared in fury, turning his full attention on them. The sky rained down spears of solidified time. It was Nozomi's turn. Her golden shields expanded, a dome of absolute defense that weathered the storm, cracking and groaning under the strain but holding firm. They repeated the impossible maneuver. Yoruichi distracted. Naruto created the platform. Sui Feng fired her second, limit-defying shot. The second conduit was obliterated. Her right arm was now badly burned from the recoil. But her eyes burned with triumph. Only one remained. But Inaba was desperate. He focused all his power, the entire nexus warping around him, into a single, devastating attack aimed at the Shinanmaru. I'm not fast enough. Naruto realized. He couldn't create a platform and get Sui Feng there in time. It was Yoruichi who saw the solution. As Inaba gathered his power, his own body became the final conduit. The target isn't the throne anymore, it's him. She screamed. Sui Feng, hit him. Naruto, get me there. It was a maneuver they had never practiced, a feat of impossible timing. Naruto grabbed Yoruichi, who in turn grabbed the exhausted Sui Feng. Thwip. He teleported them directly in front of the incandescent Inaba. Yoruichi, with a final, desperate surge of Shunko, threw Sui Feng forward. Sui Feng, with the last of her strength, struck Inaba's chest with her Shikai. First step. Before Inaba could retaliate, Naruto teleported them away again. Another feint from Yoruichi. Another teleport. Another perfect throw. Sui Feng's stinger struck the exact same spot. The butterfly of death appeared on the chest of the god of the empty sky. Inaba froze, a look of disbelief on his face. He was severed from the nexus. His source of infinite power was gone. He was mortal again. Naruto appeared before him, a sage art, massive Rasengan in his hand. The world doesn't need a new god, Inaba, he said, his voice quiet. It just needs people willing to fight for it. He slammed the Rasengan into Inaba's chest. The artisan who sought perfection was unmade by the raw, chaotic, but living energy of a hero. He dissolved into light, his final, surprised expression one of utter defeat. But as his will vanished, the nexus, no longer held together by his power, began to die. The very fabric of the pocket dimension began to tear apart, the chaotic energies now raging without a master. The entire world was collapsing into a singularity that threatened to pull both Konoha and the Soul Society in with it. Naruto pushed his exhausted friends towards the Shinanmaru. Go. Get out of here. Not without you. Yoruichi screamed, trying to reach for him. I can't stop this thing from a distance, he said, turning to face the collapsing reality. He was the eye of the storm. I have to seal it from the inside. He closed his eyes, and the golden chains of the Uzumaki clan erupted from him once more. But this time, they weren't just chains. They were threads, and he was the weaver. He pulled on his father's legacy, on the second Hokage's genius, on his own hard-won mastery. This would be his ultimate symphony. Horaishin. Jikutensei. Flying Raijin. Divine space-time reincarnation. He did not fight the collapse. He embraced it. The golden chains spread out, becoming a net that caught the fragments of the dying world, the chunks of Konoha, the rooftops of the Seraite, the rivers of Chakra and Reishi. He became the gravitational center of the apocalypse. With his Horaishin formula as the needle and the chains as his thread, he began to fold space-time itself. He was not destroying the nexus. He was gathering it, compressing it, sewing its edges together. He was taking this failed, chaotic reality and forging it into a new, sealed, self-contained universe, a star in a bottle that would drift harmlessly in the void between worlds. It was the most beautiful, most complex, and most powerful seal ever conceived. It was an act of pure, selfless creation born from the heart of destruction. From the viewport of the fleeing Shinanmaru, Yoruichi, Sui Feng, and Nozomi watch. Head in awe as the chaotic nexus was drawn into the single, brilliant golden figure of Naruto Uzumaki. They saw him weave reality, and with a final, blinding flash of light, the entire dimension, the wound between worlds, vanished. All that was left was an empty, silent void. And then, his light faded. His body, utterly drained of every last drop of chakra and energy, went limp. Naruto Uzumaki, the weaver of worlds, began to fall into the infinite, empty darkness. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. Crossroads of Eternity. The universe held its breath. The violent, screaming chaos of the Nexus, a Dimensi, unborn of mad genius and stolen realities, was gone. In its place was a perfect, silent void, the empty space between worlds. And into this infinite nothingness, the weaver of worlds, his light extinguished, fell. Naruto Uzumaki was a falling star, his body limp, his mind lost in a darkness deeper than the void around him. He had poured out everything, his chakra, his life force, his very soul, into the ultimate act of creation and sealing. The vessel that remained was an empty, fragile thing. From the viewport of the fleeing Shinanmaru, Yoruichi watched his small, distant form tumble into the abyss. For a single, horrifying second, she was frozen. Then, a primal instinct, a force more powerful than reason or exhaustion, took over. Before Sui Feng could react, before Nozomi could even gasp, Yoruichi was gone from the cockpit. She exploded from the ship in a burst of pure shunpo, a golden black comet chasing a dying star. The void was not empty, it was filled with a residual, directionless energy that tore at her. But she ignored it. Her world had narrowed to a single point of focus. The falling blonde man who had, against all odds, become her equal. She pushed her speed beyond its limits, beyond reason. Her own Ryutsu burning as fuel. She was faster than sound, faster than light. She was the goddess of flash, and she would not be outrun by death. She caught him. Her arms wrapped around his unconscious form, pulling him into an embrace that was both desperate and fiercely protective. He was unnervingly light, his inner fire completely banked. For a moment, she just held him there. Adrift in the silent eternity between worlds, a goddess holding her fallen hero. The tear in reality leading back to Karakura was already closing. With Naruto in her arms, Yoruichi poured the last of her energy into a final, desperate burst of speed. They shot through the shimmering rift a mere second before it sealed shut behind them with a silent, final snap, leaving the void to its eternal quiet. They emerged into the smoke-filled sky of their own world and landed heavily on the roof of a battered department store. Naruto did not stir. His breathing was shallow, his pulse a faint, thready thing. He was alive, but only just. The cost of his miracle had been nearly absolute. 1 month later, the world had begun to heal. The scars on Karakura town were still visible, skeletal frames of buildings. Freshly paved asphalt over cracked streets, a park where young saplings were planted in place of ancient, scorched trees, but they were scars, not open wounds. The citizens, resilient and determined, were rebuilding. Life. in its stubborn, beautiful way, was returning. For a month, Naruto had slept. He lay in a private, sterile room in the 4th Division's barracks, a place Captain Unohana had personally prepared. He was a living paradox, a subject of intense medical fascination. His chakra coils were shattered, his cells were saturated with a unique, inert form of dimensional energy. And his life force was flickering like a candle in a gale. Any other being, human or Shinigami, would have died 1,000 times over. Yet, he lived. Kurama, deep within him, was a slumbering mountain. His own vast energy entirely consumed in the slow, arduous process of keeping their shared soul tethered to the world of the living. Unohana and her most trusted healers worked tirelessly, not with conventional Kido, which had no effect on him, but with delicate infusions of reishi designed to stabilize the foreign energy within him, coaxing his own miraculous healing factor back online. During that month, his friends kept a quiet vigil. They visited in shifts, each dealing with the aftermath of the war in their own way. Sui Feng filed a report with the Gotei 13 that was so detailed, filled with a grudging but undeniable respect for the Ryoka, that it sent ripples of shock and debate through the Seraite. Nozomi, now a permanent resident of the Urahara Shoten, blossomed, her fear replaced by a quiet confidence as she helped with the city's reconstruction, her powers now a tool of creation, not just defense. Tatsuki returned to her dojo, training with a new intensity, her own human limits a challenge she now embraced with pride. And Yoruichi, she was simply there. She rarely left his side, a silent, constant presence in the quiet room. She would watch him for hours, her usual playful arrogance gone, replaced by a deep, patient stillness. She had seen gods and monsters, but she had never seen anything like the quiet strength of the man sleeping before her. He woke as the sun was setting. The room bathed in a soft, orange light. His first sensation was the feel of a warm, calloused hand holding his. He blinked, his cerulean eyes slowly focusing. Yoruichi was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on her arms, her violet hair spilling over the white sheets. She looked younger, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. He gently squeezed her hand. Her golden eyes snapped open instantly. The instincts of a warrior never truly sleeping. She saw him, saw his eyes open and clear, and the wave of pure, undiluted relief that washed over her face was a more profound confession than any words could ever be. Hey, he rasped, his throat dry. Hey, yourself, bonfire, she whispered, a brilliant, genuine smile spreading across her face. Took you long enough. 2 days later, Naruto stood with Urahara in the newly repaired underground chamber. He was still weak, leaning on a cane Urahara had, whimsically, fashioned to look like his Zanpakuto, Benihime, but he was steady. The verdict he had been dreading, yet expecting, was finally delivered. It's truly remarkable, from a scientific standpoint, Urahara said, gesturing to a complex energy model on his main screen. Your final jutsu, the Jikutensei, it didn't just seal the nexus away. It seems to have used its chaotic energy as a catalyst to, for lack of a better term, cauterize the wound between the worlds. He pointed to a line on the graph. The dimensional walls, which were thin and permeable due to the rift, have been reinforced. They are thicker, stronger, and more stable than they have been in millennia. You didn't just lock a door, Naruto-san. You rebuilt the entire wall out of celestial granite. It's a work of genius. Cut to the chase, Kazuki, Naruto said, his voice quiet. Urahara's smile became a sad, gentle thing. He tipped his hat. The good news is that our worlds are safe from a similar incursion for the foreseeable future. The bad news is that the wall is completely impenetrable. There is no signal, no resonance, no tear to latch onto. The path to your home is, for all intents and purposes, permanently closed. The words, though expected, landed with a heavy, final thud. It was over. His old life, his friends, Kakashi, Sakura, Gaara, his dream of becoming Hokage, they were all gone. Not dead, but lost to him, on the other side of an impassable eternity. He felt a profound, hollow grief. A deep ache for a world he would never see again. He didn't rage. He didn't break down. He had been a soldier for too long. He simply nodded, a slow, somber acceptance of the price of his victory. Later that evening, He stood alone on the highest skyscraper in the newly rebuilt city center. The city lights spread out below him like a galaxy of earthbound stars. He looked up at the moon. The same moon he had shared with his home, and let the grief wash over him. It is the way of things, Kit, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, awake and aware for the first time since the battle. The fox's tone was not one of pity, but of ancient, pragmatic wisdom. A shinobi makes his choice. He lives with the consequences. You chose to save this world. This is the consequence. I chose to save my friends. Naruto whispered to the wind. Here. And there. And you did, Kurama affirmed. You sealed the rift. Your home is safe because of what you did. Your dream was to be Hokage. To be the pillar that protects everyone. Your village has simply gotten bigger. Naruto looked down at the city, at the endless streams of headlights, the lights of homes where families were eating dinner. The faint sounds of life and laughter rising on the air. He had lost his village. But Kurama was right. He had found a whole new world that needed a pillar. His role hadn't ended. It had just been redefined. He let out a long, slow breath, and with it, he let go of the past. He accepted his new reality not as an exile, but as a guardian. His watch had begun. His formal summons to the Soul Society came a week later. He was no longer treated as a rogue element, but as a dignitary. He stood in the main hall of the 1st Division, before the assembled captains of the Gote 13. Capt. Ain Commander Yamamoto looked at him with his one good eye, a long, appraising stare. Uzumaki Naruto, the old man's voice boomed. You are an anomaly. Your power is foreign, your methods are unorthodox. Yet, you have twice saved the world of the living and, by extension, the Soul Society from a threat born of our own failings. The Gote 13 owes you a debt. After the formal, stuffy proceedings, Sui Feng met him in the serene gardens of the 2nd Division. You are a disruption to our entire power structure, she said, though her tone lacked its usual bite. It was a statement of fact. But he Captain Commander has issued a new directive. You are to be considered a friendly, independent ally. The Onmitsukido will coordinate with you on all threats related to dimensional instability. A partnership, then, Naruto said with a small smile. A strategic alliance, she corrected, though a faint blush touched her cheeks. Train with me sometime, Uzumaki. Your Hiraishin is a crude, if effective, tool. I could teach you true precision. It was her version of an invitation, an offer of continued companionship built on the bedrock of their shared respect for combat. His final check-up with Captain Unohana was a more unsettling affair. She looked at him with her serene smile, but her eyes held the predatory gleam of a scientist who had just glimpsed perfection. Your recovery is complete, she said, her voice like soft silk. Your body has fully metabolized the dimensional energies. You are, in essence, a new form of being. A perfect hybrid. It is utterly fascinating. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. I must confess, I have never been so professionally disappointed that a war has ended. The chance to see you in battle again, it would be a singular privilege. He left. Her care feeling both completely healed and profoundly unnerved, keenly aware that their connection was a dangerous, thrilling thing that existed on the edge of a knife. Life settled into a new kind of normal. He spent his days helping at the shop, a strange but comforting domesticity he had never known. Nozomi, now his firm friend, would often sit with him, practicing her control by creating beautiful, shimmering birds of golden light that would fly around his head, her laughter free and unburdened. He would meet Tatsuki for ramen, sitting in the rebuilt stand, the conversation easy and familiar. She would tell him about her karate tournament, he would tell her about trying to understand Kido, and they would laugh. She was his anchor to the normal world, a reminder of the simple, human lives he was now sworn to protect. The communication link to the land of snow, while weak, was stable. He had formal, weekly calls with Koyuki. They would discuss the political ramifications of his actions, of the new defensive technologies she was developing based on his abilities. But at the end of each call, the formality would drop. You are a hero here, Naruto, she would say, her voice soft. Know that you have a nation that stands with you, always. It was a bittersweet connection across an impossible distance, a bond of two leaders who understood the weight of the crowns they wore. But it was on the rooftop, under the vast, starry sky, that he found his new center. He sat with Yoruichi, watching the healed city glitter below. The silence between them was no longer quiet, it was full. It was a language of its own. So, she said, nudging him with her shoulder. A god killer, a dimensional savior, and a full-time employee at a candy shop. Quite the resume you're building. He chuckled, a real, easy laugh. Got to stay busy. What will you do now? She asked, her voice serious, her golden eyes watching his face in the moonlight. For real. He looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of the city. At the world that had become his charge. He thought of the new bonds he had forged, the strange and powerful family he was now a part of. He was a man without a past, a leader without a title. A hero without a home to return to. And yet, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt grounded. I'll do what I've always done, he said, looking at her, his cerulean eyes clear and certain. I'll protect my precious people. And I'll build something. Something that lasts. She smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that reached her eyes. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple, comfortable gesture that spoke of 1,000 shared battles and 1,000,000 moments yet to come. They were partners. They were equals. They were home for each other. He looked out at the city lights. At this strange, chaotic, wonderful world that had claimed him. He felt the steady presence of Yoruichi beside him, the loyalty of his new friends below, and the quiet, rumbling power of his oldest friend within him. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't the dream he had fought for. It was something new, something different, something he would build with his own 2 hands. Yeah, he thought, a sense of profound, quiet peace settling over him. This can be home. Chapter 10 end.